Welcome, and thank you for joining ISO Board of Governors meeting. Before we begin, please ensure you have opened the WebEx chat panel by using the associated icon located at the bottom of your screen. Note that all audio connections are muted at this time. If you require technical assistance, please send a chat to the event producer. With that, I will turn the conference over to Roger Cullington. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. Good morning, board members. Let me start out with the roll call, and then I will turn it over to you, Governor Galitzeva. Chair Galitzeva?
Present.
Governor Borenstein?
Present.
Governor Bhagwat?
Present.
And Governor Leslie?
Present.
Excellent. We do have a quorum. Let me turn it to you, Chair Galitzeva.
Thank you so much, Roger. Welcome, everybody, to the Board of Governors meeting. At this time, do we have any public comment on items not related to the agenda? Is there anyone wishing to make?
Yeah, operator, if you could please queue up Q&A.
Yes. To submit a question or make a statement, please press #2 on your telephone keypad. Once again, pressing #2 on your telephone keypad will indicate you wish to make a statement. We have none at this time.
Thank you very much. Item number 2, Roger, decision on general session minutes for November 18, 2020.
Yes, thank you. We need a motion for the general session minutes for November 18, 2020. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
I think Mary was first on that, and
Separate second.
And since we are sort of video, audio, I'm going to take the vote to you separately. Governor Galitzeva, your vote?
Aye.
Governor Bhagwat?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
And Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Thank you, governors.
Thank you, Roger. Item number 3, CEO report, Elliot Mainzer.
Yes, good morning, Board of Governors and colleagues. Pleased to discuss and read from my CEO report submitted on December 9th, 2020. I want to start out wishing everybody well and reporting on our coronavirus response. Our overall business continuity at the ISO is proceeding well at the moment, with the vast majority of ISO staff working remotely. Back in late November, in response to the rapid increase in the number of coronavirus cases statewide, new restrictions put in place by Governor Newsom, we reverted to the highly restricted building access limitations that were first introduced last March as part of our pandemic response plan. The ISO does intend to remain in this highly restricted posture until at least January 17, 2021, and more broadly, until there's widespread vaccination, significant diminishment of the spread, or therapeutics that render COVID-19 relatively effective to remain in a primarily virtual operating posture for employees and visitors. Just a quick review of overall balancing area system conditions. In November and in early December, high winds did create severe fire risks in California. In response, the California Investor and Utilities activated several PSPS events. During the recent PSPS events, no BES lines were de-energized. However, fires did affect some transmission lines in Southern California, and the ISO redispatched generation to manage the issue and was prepared to balance the resultant island if necessary. I wanted to provide a quick update on the events of last Sunday. On Sunday, December 12th at 6:47 a.m., 2 of the 3 500 kV lines that tied Northern and Southern California together, known as Path 26, relayed due to a failed insulator string. The third line was out on scheduled maintenance, so this event caused an open loop condition. The remedial action scheme for Path 26 correctly acted and dropped 270 megawatts of load in the SCE territory. The SCE load was restored at 7:36 a.m. and Path 26 was reestablished at 1:25 p.m. With respect to RC operations, RC West loads has transitioned into the winter load pattern. November loads were in the 75 gigawatt range. PSPS events have not impacted wide area reliability and have been managed at the local level. Turning to the final root cause analysis, the ISO, the CPUC and CEC leadership and staff continue to coordinate closely on the final root cause analysis, and we are on target to complete the report by the end of December. Agency and ISO staff are finalizing additional analysis of demand response, resource performance, and under scheduling, and these updates and additional information regarding high heat days during the Labor Day weekend will be reflected in the final report. So a lot of work on that front. Also, with respect to summer 2021 readiness, ISO and agency staff have been coordinating on delivering on the action items identified in the joint preliminary root cause analysis. On November 30th, 2020, the ISO launched a web page dedicated to providing timely updates to stakeholders on the ISO's efforts to prepare for next summer. To further the public dialogue, we are also holding regular conference calls dedicated to these issues, with the first call held back on December 8th. ISO staff also conducted a workshop to dive more deeply into market parameters and scheduling priorities as identified in the preliminary root cause analysis. We requested stakeholder input as we evaluate the need for additional changes to our residual unit commitment process beyond those changes that were implemented last summer. ISO staff is also working on a roadmap to reliably manage the significant entry of storage resources next summer and beyond. We've developed several enhancements to manage storage resources, but many of those changes will not be in effect until next fall, and there are additional topics related to market design and price signals of interest to the storage community that require additional dialogue. In the interim, we'll be working with storage providers to maximize the likelihood that their resources will be available to provide reliable dispatchable capacity during the net peak hours next summer. And similarly, we continue to engage with the utility distribution companies and distributed energy demand response providers to further their reliable and efficient participation in grid operations heading into summer of 2021. With respect to the recent CPUC order instituting rulemaking comments, I just wanted to note that the ISO recently submitted comments into this order in advance of summer 2021. As interim measures, the ISO proposed to increase the planning reserve margin from 15 to 20%, and that the revised planning reserve margin be applied to both the gross peak and the net peak when solar production is very low or zero during the months of June through October 21st. The ISO suggested that the increased planning reserve margin is necessary to account for a higher forced outage rate identified in prior ISO studies, as well as additional load and resource volatility. I note that we've submitted these comments in the spirit of open collaboration and are continuing to seek feedback and collaboration with other parties in the region to make sure that we're moving this conversation in the right direction. So just wanted to make sure everybody knows that this is a very important topic of dialogue within the state. I also like to note, with respect to our recent proposed revision request, 1280, back in August of 2020, the ISO submitted proposed revision request 1280 through its business practice manual change management process. And the purpose of this PRR is to strengthen the ISO's administration of the resource adequacy elements of its tariff by ensuring that only capacity subject to the ISO's RA tariff requirement counts towards meeting load-serving entities' RA obligations. The proposed change would end the practice of counting credits towards meeting LSE RA obligations with resources or load curtailment procedures that did not meet the definition of RA capacity under the ISO tariff and that are not subject to the tariff's RA provisions. The ISO's proposed business practice manual revisions were opposed and appealed by several parties. The ISO Executive Appeals Committee met on December 1st, 2020, and heard from 6 appellants as well as ISO staff. As confirmed in a letter from CPUC Chair Maribel Batcher, the ISO identified important resource adequacy issues that do need to be resolved as expeditiously as possible. Based on the materials provided and the discussions with the appellants, the Executive Appeals Committee has determined the best way to resolve these issues at this point is to work in a focused and collaborative fashion with the CPUC, other local regulatory authorities, and other stakeholders to resolve these issues as expeditiously as possible. And therefore, the Executive Appeals Committee ruled that the BPM amendments set forth in PRR 1280 will be held in abeyance until August 1st, 2021, at which time ISO management can then determine whether or not the ISO's expressed concerns have been satisfactorily addressed. This is part of, I think, a very important and conscious effort to work as closely and as collaboratively as possible with our peers at state agencies and to get these issues resolved as effectively as possible. I'd finally note with respect to system market power mitigation, prior to the events of August and September 2020, the ISO analyzed the potential for the exercise of system market power. Pricing performance during summer events continues to be reviewed by both the ISO and DMM. And while supply conditions this summer were such that market power could have been exercised, based on bids during the summer events, the ISO and DMM did not observe entities exercising system market power. The ISO is continuing to develop a real-time system market power mitigation proposal, and management will seek approval of this proposal from the Board of Governors before next summer if our analysis indicates that system market power is occurring. Ultimately, price formation should not be undermined by the exercise of market power, but price formation should also be allowed to reflect competitive market dynamics and appropriately reflect and incentivize supply and demand response. I appreciate the opportunity to get those points out this morning. There's a lot to discuss, a lot of content. I just wanted to thank everybody for a very productive season. Wish you all a safe and restful holiday season and a very productive and constructive 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elliot. Any questions for Elliot from the board? No? Any questions from the public?
As a reminder, pressing pound 2 will indicate you wish to make a statement. We have none at this time.
Thank you. Item number 4, EIM Governing Body Chair Report. Mr. John Prescott.
Operator, if you could unmute John Prescott's line.
John, would you please press pound 2 on your telephone keypad? Thank you.
Is John there?
Hello.
Okay, John, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Okay. Well, good morning, Chair Glitova and governors. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Western EIM governing body. The governing body met virtually on December 2nd, 2020, and in our executive session, Governor Bornstein gave us a report on the DMM Oversight Committee, and Eric Hildebrand gave us a briefing on DMM activities. And in our general session, Therese Hampton, Chair of the Governance Review Committee, updated the governing body about the Governance Review Committee progress, and I believe Therese will give you an update right after my report today. We heard from Oregon PUC Commissioner Letha Tawney, Chair of the Body of State Regulators, and she updated us on their activities. And Pam Sporborg with Portland General, Chair of the Regional Issues Forum, gave us a report on current RIF topics. Then we heard from Khalid Abdul Rahman. He gave us a report on the 5 Western EIM member implementations scheduled for the spring of 2021. And those include the Balancing Authority of Northern California Phase 2, which includes part of the Western Area Power Administration. It's also going to be Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Northwestern Energy, Public Service Company of New Mexico, and Turlock Irrigation District. And we look forward to that implementation. And just by way of heads up, there's going to be scheduled 6 more for the following year in 2022. So we're pretty excited about that. And then we heard presentations on 3 initiatives which required action by the governing body. After considering the information presented by ISO staff, comments from the DMM, public comments, and discussion by the governing body voted as follows. The first item, Energy Storage and Distributed Energy Resources Phase 4, the default energy bid proposal. Our decisional role is advisory. The governing body voted to advise the Board of Governors to approve this proposal. And this is your agenda item 7 today. Second, which is the EIM base schedule submission, our decisional role is primary. The governing body voted to approve this proposal, and this is on your consent agenda today. And then third, which is the real-time settlement review, our decisional role is both primary and advisory. The governing body voted to approve the 3 parts of this proposal over which we have primary authority. And this is on your consent agenda today. and the governing body voted to advise the Board of Governors to approve the one part of this proposal over which we have advisory authority. This is your agenda item 8 today. So a quick summary on our actions. Both proposals over which we had primary authority are on your consent agenda item as agenda items today on the consent agenda, and we approved both those. And on your agenda item 7, the governing body advises the Board of Governors to approve the proposal. And on your agenda item 8, the governing body advises the Board of Governors to approve the proposal. And that's the end of my report.
Thank you so much, John. Busy meeting. Any questions for John Prescott from the Board of Governors? Any questions from the public?
As a reminder, pressing pound 2 will indicate you wish to make a statement. We have none at this time.
Thank you so much, John. It has been a pleasure to work with you and the governing body. Have a wonderful holiday season, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Same to you all.
Okay. Item number 5, EIM Governance Review Committee Chair Report, Ms. Therese Hampton. Operator, can you please unmute Therese?
Your line is now unmuted. Go ahead.
We can't hear anything.
Sorry, I was double muted. Good morning. The operator did unmute me. I just didn't unmute myself. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to give an update. I'm actually really happy to give the update today to say on Monday we did release the revised straw proposal, and we couldn't have gotten there without the full contribution of all the Governance Review Committee members and terrific drafting and support by the ISO staff. So thank you to all of them. I listened in on the body of state regulators call last week, and they said, is the Governance Review Committee going to give us a Christmas present, kind of our holiday gift, and, let us review this over the holiday break? That's not the intention. We do want to make it available, but we're giving a very, very long review period till January 22nd. So you can let it sit until January 4th and then still have a full 3-week review period for that. The revised straw proposal builds on the initial straw proposal. What's included in there is the recommendations that we continue to support, but we've taken into account a lot of the different stakeholder perspectives and have given some options in certain places, and we've called out specific areas where we are looking for stakeholder input. So we have a meeting tomorrow afternoon where we'll go over all the major elements of the revised straw proposal, specifically highlighting those areas where we're looking for stakeholder input, and close of comment on January 22nd. And we're building the calendar to get us to a final proposal by close to the end of Q1 of 2021. I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Therese. And I'll have to say that the Governance Review Committee works really hard under the chairmanship of Therese Hampton, which is terrific. We're on schedule to release the final report, and it's a thrilling read. You should all read it, and if you have any questions, comment on it. And I think we've done a really great job. Thank you, Therese, so much for all the hard work. And have a wonderful holiday season, and don't, read the report as a Christmas gift.
I actually have a question, Angelina.
Sure.
Is there going to, thank you, Therese. I'm looking forward to looking at the revised straw proposal. Is there going to be a track changes version or a guide to what has changed since the original straw proposal? Or has the change been so extensive that doesn't even work?
That's a great question, and thank you for that question. It's not done in track changes. However, I think the way the straw proposal is written, we've captured both what the original proposal was, what the stakeholder comments are, and then whether we're continuing to support our original recommendation or suggesting some modifications to the recommendation. So it should read fairly comprehensively and kind of walk through the path of an original recommendation to where we are today.
Great. Thank you. And thanks for all your work on that.
Yes, it's a very, very thorough document, and a lot of hard work went into it, and everyone on the Governance Review Committee deserves a lot of congratulations for that. Thank you again, Therese.
Thank you.
Okay. Item number 6, decision on consent agenda, Roger Collington, and we did hear from John Prescott and their support for the items, both in primary and advisory role from the EIM governing body.
Great, thank you. Just as the reminder, the consent agenda consists of matters that the EIM governing body has approved under its primary authority. And on today's consent agenda, we have the EIM base schedule submission proposal and the real-time settlement review proposal, again, both which were approved by the EIM governing body. And after receiving that approval, we placed the proposal on the consent agenda for the board to vote as a whole. And if the majority of the board approves the consent agenda, that's the end of it, and we move forward. And if not, then we can pull an item off the consent agenda for the board to separately discuss. I will also note for the record that the board has been provided a public comment letter that was also provided to the governing body by the Salt River Project Agricultural Improvement and Power District, and that was given to, again, both the board and the governing body. So with that, the motion is move that the Board of Governors approves the December 2nd, 2020 consent agenda comprised of rule changes around EIM real-time settlement and EIM base schedule submission deadline, and move that the Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the enhancements described in management's memorandum to the EIM governing body dated November 25, 2020, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policies but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Do we have a motion?
Before the motion, any questions from the board members or comments? No. Okay. Well, we have a motion. I'll move.
I'll second.
Okay, and I will take your votes. Governor Bornstein?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
Governor Bogwat?
Aye.
And Chair Elizabeth?
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, Governors. The motion passes.
Great. Next, number 7, decision on energy storage and distributed energy resources default energy bid proposal. Ms. Anna McKenna, and we already have approval from the governing body in their advisory capacity.
Good morning, Chair Gotleva and governors. We are happy to present to you today our proposal on the energy storage distributed energy resources default energy bid. This proposal will provide a default energy bid for storage resources as well as the ability to implement our local market power mitigation to the storage resources under certain conditions. And I will note that we did receive a public comment letter from Vistra regarding certain concerns that they raised with the proposal. This morning we will have Greg Cook presenting the proposal to you, and he will address their concerns in his presentation. Greg is the Executive Director of Market and Infrastructure Policy, and with this I will turn it over to him to provide you a presentation on our proposal.
Yeah, and let me just interject that yes, we did receive the public comment letter, and that has been provided to the board.
Thank you, Roger. And with that, I believe Greg is on the line to provide us a presentation on the proposal.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Chair Galitova and governors. So I'm here to present for you our decision on the default energy bid for storage resources. So the proposal we are presenting today was part of the Energy Storage and Distributed Energy Resource Phase 4, otherwise known as ESDR 4 initiative, that was presented to you back in October. And this element of the proposal was pulled at that time to allow more time to consider feedback that we received from the Market Surveillance Committee opinion on the ESDR 4 proposal. And so we were able to do that by extending the stakeholder process so that we could consider their recommendations. And then, our plan is that all elements of the ESDR 4 proposal, those that you approved in October, as well as this element, would all be implemented next year in the fall of 2021. Next slide, please, Christina. So what we're proposing a default energy bid cost methodology for storage resources. The ISO applies market power mitigation measures to most resources in the market when we detect uncompetitive conditions. However, those market power mitigation measures are not applied to storage resources today, and that's for two primary reasons. First is that we have very little energy storage on the system today, and second, we do not have cost-based default energy bids that we can use for the mitigation. However, we are expecting significant amounts of storage resources to interconnect to the ISO over the next few years. I think, up to 2,000 megawatts by the end of next year alone, and then upwards of 3,300 megawatts over the next few years. So it's very important that we need to find a methodology for estimating these default energy bids for storage resources. However, estimating those costs is much more complex than other resources such as gas resources, where those marginal costs are fairly straightforward, which are largely a function of their fuel costs and heat rates, whereas when we're looking at storage resources, there are several different cost components that need to be considered. But in the end, by establishing this storage default energy bid, we will then be able to allow the market power mitigation measures to be applied to storage resources. Next slide, please. So what we're proposing is how we're tagging a balanced methodology for estimating storage default energy bids. And we call it a balanced methodology because what we came up with was something that, something that wasn't overly complex. We looked at much more complex ways of doing this that could have potentially been more accurate, but would have been, extremely burdensome for us to implement and may not be working for all different technology types. So again, we tried to come up with this balanced methodology that would not be overly complex, but yet would capture the primary costs of most storage resources that we're seeing coming into the market. So what we're proposing is a methodology that has three basic components to it. The first is energy procurement costs. Now, these are the costs that would be incurred to essentially charge the battery. And what we're proposing here is to use day-ahead market prices for the least expensive duration of time for charging the battery. So, what we're primarily seeing coming into our market today are 4-hour duration batteries. So if we take that as our example, for the energy procurement costs, we would use the lowest 4-hour price period in the day-ahead market to establish the energy procurement costs for the battery. The second component is the marginal cost to charge and discharge the battery. And this is predicated on the expected cost is based on one charge or discharge cycle per day. So what the variable costs that we're talking about here would be those costs of operating that storage resource beyond its specified range of performance. And so we would allow the resources to submit these costs, and then we would vet those costs through the ISO processes. And by vetting those, we would be looking at information such as estimates from storage manufacturers and that sort of thing. But generally, we expect these costs to be somewhere in the range of $30 a megawatt hour or less, but these would also vary by technology. We also had a comment, Anna mentioned the Vistra letter, where they thought we should also be including grid management charge costs within the default energy bid. And here, where we're including variable costs, we would allow those resources to also include the variable components of the grid management charge in these costs as well. So I wanted to clarify that. And then finally, the third component is the opportunity costs. And these are really daily opportunity costs. And these are the costs that we would be looking at to ensure that we could discharge the battery during the highest priced time of the day. And, again, taking our 4-hour battery as an example, we would then take the fourth highest hourly price in the day-ahead market to establish that daily opportunity cost. And then we would to establish the DEB, we would take the maximum of either the sum of those first components, the energy procurement costs and the marginal cost to charge and discharge, or the opportunity cost, whichever was higher, and that would establish their default energy bid. So again, we think that this will work well for the majority of resources. However, if the storage resource finds that this doesn't accurately capture their costs, they have the option to elect to use a negotiated default energy bid option, where they can come in and show what their actual costs are and come up with a unique DEB for their situation. However, we did do a fair amount of analysis on this that did show that our proposed default energy bid will work well to efficiently dispatch resources. So we really do not expect to have many resources using the negotiated option, as we expect the default option will work for most resources. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, our proposal also includes 2 changes recommended by the Market Surveillance Committee in their ESDR 4 opinion that they provided back in October. The first is to exclude opportunity costs from the day-ahead default energy bid formulation. The MSC properly noted that this is not necessary because the day-ahead market optimization accounts for opportunity costs as it does its optimization over the 24-hour horizon of the day-ahead market. And then their second recommendation was to exempt small storage resources from market power mitigation. And so we are proposing to exempt resources that are less than 5 megawatts from market power mitigation, but we would be looking at only those resources whose parent companies are net buyers in the market. Now, we would expect this to be very few resources, as most storage resources in the interconnection queue range from 20 to over 200 megawatts. But, again, we agree with the Market Surveillance Committee that it's appropriate to exempt these resources because they really have no ability to exercise market power, and as a result have very strong incentives to bid their true marginal costs into the market. Next slide, please. So stakeholders generally support what we're proposing here for the default energy bid for storage resources. We did receive some stakeholder feedback during the stakeholder process, which prompted us to change how we did the estimated cost to buy energy. In a sense, we set a $0 minimum when considering those energy procurement costs. There were also some concerns raised that the methodology could underestimate the real-time opportunity and energy costs. In response to that, we generally do see very strong convergence between day-ahead and real-time market prices. And furthermore, we really need to consider prices for storage resources that occurred throughout the entire day. And the best place to get those prices, again, is through the day-ahead market. Next, there was concern that the methodology may not work well for batteries with longer than 8 hours of duration. There's a couple of reasons for that with that long of duration, their either charge or discharge cycle could transfer over into the next day. And also, we could potentially have fairly low opportunity costs if you go down to the 8th lowest priced hour or lower. Again, we're not expecting, currently we don't see many of these long duration batteries coming into the market, but in any event, if they find that the methodology doesn't work for them, they can always, again, opt to use that negotiated option. And then finally, there was the concern over the aggregation of small resources in trying to basically circumvent the market power mitigation measures. Again, we don't expect this to be an issue because we're not expecting to see many resources smaller than that 5 megawatt threshold. And furthermore, as I mentioned, we expect that default energy bid to work fairly well based on the analysis that we conducted. And I'll also, as Anna mentioned, also briefly address some of the issues that were brought up in the Vistra letter that was presented to you. They had, strong concerns about exempting small resources. As I mentioned, we agree with the Market Surveillance Committee recommendation on this, that they really have no ability to exercise market power, and therefore it's more efficient to actually exempt them so that they can provide their true marginal costs into the market. We do not see this as a structural advantage for these small resources. In fact, I kind of view it the opposite way. Had we not applied market power mitigation measures to the larger storage resources, they would have actually had a structural advantage because of the potential ability to exercise market power. They also raised some concerns about, our admission that our DEB is not perfectly accurate. Again, I stress that what we came up with here is really a balance of complexity and ensuring that we can capture those primary costs. I would also say this is a fairly conservative cost estimate that we believe will work well for most resources. If anything, it's probably a little on the high side. And again, for those that it doesn't work well for, they always have that option of electing the negotiated default energy bid. And next, they argued that we should have allowed these resources to have an opportunity cost adder. So this is policy that we put in place a couple of years ago, and this is really for use-limited resources that have use limitations outside of our market horizon. So, one thing I want to make clear is if we have resources that believe they do have those use limitations that are outside of our market horizon, they're free to come in and apply for that opportunity cost adder. However, it wasn't really a focus of this stakeholder process because, again, we're primarily seeing these 4-hour batteries whose, use limitations are well within the current 24-hour market horizon. And then finally, they argued that we should have considered the grid management charge, which I talked about briefly. Again, the variable components of that, we agree could be included in that variable cost component that they submit to us. And then finally, they argued for a frequently mitigated bid adder is part of our tariff and was developed over 15 years ago for gas resources. First I'll address, most of these concerns that Vistra brought up came up, very late in our stakeholder process. This frequently mitigated bid adder is something that we could consider, but it's definitely something that would need to be vetted. This was not in any shape or means developed for storage resources. Back then, this was really developed for gas resources. This was also prior to a lot of the resource adequacy requirements being put in place. So, that's something that would definitely have to be thought through. We didn't have any other stakeholders bring this up through the primary stakeholder process. This was only brought up near the end when we were discussing, when we were really limiting the discussions to whether we should consider those recommendations by the Market Surveillance Committee. So, our point on that is I think that's something we'd have to be very careful about and that we could potentially, if it becomes an issue, address in, further future enhancements to the default energy bid for storage. But we believe where we landed today is a good conservative starting place for applying market power mitigation to storage resources. And finally,
Greg, can I interrupt for just a second?
Sure.
Can you say a couple more words about the frequently mitigated bid adder? I don't know. I'm not familiar with that, and I guess the term isn't obvious to me what it means.
Yeah, and it's something that
could mean.
Yeah, so it was something that was added to our tariff. Like I said, I think it was way back in 2005-ish, somewhere around there. And it was put in place for concerns that some resources had that if they were mitigated frequently, and I think what we called frequent was like over 80% of the time. So, it's a very high bar that we would put an adder onto their default energy bid. And I think the justification at that time was that, they needed to have some, if they were often the marginal unit, they needed to have some certainty that they could collect some of their, more of their fixed costs through the market. Again, this was, many years ago and primarily used for gas resources. I have some concerns about how well that would work for storage resources. It could lead to potentially some inefficient results in how we would be, ultimately charging and discharging those resources over the day. But that's essentially what it was.
Thank you.
I recall. And then the final point they made was that they said that our policy was ambiguous on how this would apply to hybrid resources. And I would say here that no, I think we're very clear that this would not apply to resources under the hybrid model. Those resources are neither storage resources nor variable energy resources, and we've been very clear in our market initiatives roadmap that we plan on in the market hybrid evolution initiative next year. That will be one of the areas of focus, is developing market power mitigation measures for those hybrid resources, which are we'll have to have a very different methodology than what we're proposing here for storage resources. So that, I believe, addressed the concerns raised in the Vistra letter. So, with that, next slide, please, Christina. We recommend that the board.
Mary.
Yes. Yeah, Mary.
Yeah, sorry. And did that satisfy the? Did you talk directly to Vista about these responses?
No, most of this I was first made aware of this last night when I received their letter, so that's why I'm addressing it here. We did receive the comments we received through the stakeholder process were whether on that frequently mitigated bid adder and the grid management charge component, which again we're clarifying that we would consider those grid management charges within our proposal, and we talked about the frequently mitigated bid adder, but. Yeah, so that's why I'm addressing those here.
Got it.
Okay, and then finally, so with that, we recommend that the board approve our proposed default energy bid for storage resources. Again, we think this is it provides an initial balanced approach for estimating these costs, and so that we can apply a default energy bid to storage resources, and this will enable us to apply market power mitigation to those resources, which again we're expecting to become a much more significant part of our generation fleet over the next few years. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any further questions you might have.
Any questions at this time for Greg from the board?
I have a few, actually. One is, Greg, so one aspect of this is that you use the lowest 4 hours or X hours of charging for marginal cost. Is there any argument, or was an argument made, that it's not always possible to access the lowest hours? I guess if it's a day-ahead market, well, is there a problem of not being able to predict which are going to be the lowest hours and therefore not being able to charge during them?
No, that's a good question. That's why we use the day-ahead market, because the day-ahead market looks, over the entire horizon of the 24 hours. So we are, it's able to, optimize the charging by selecting that lowest 4-hour period for charging the battery.
And they are able to, their cost is the CAISO energy price for charging?
Yes.
There's an additional distribution cost or transmission cost? Or is that factored in?
No, that's not factored in. This is primarily for grid-connected storage resources.
Okay, and they don't face any additional cost. Okay, can you explain? Why the $0 minimum? It seems that if they're able to charge at -20, their marginal cost is -20.
Yeah, I mean, this was a concern, I believe was brought up by Southern California Edison, and, their concern was this could, potentially result in very low default energy bids. And, when we looked at it through some of our analysis, we thought, setting this minimum at 0, does provide some protection from ensuring that we don't, again, we're trying to make this a fairly conservative approach where we're, if anything, estimating on the high side. And so that was one of the concerns. And, I think we agreed that for at least for this initial establishment of the default energy bid, it was a little more conservative approach to limit that to $0 for the charging, because you could have some, you could have some fairly significant negatives. Yeah.
I will just say that as we go to very high levels of variable resources, negative numbers are going to pop up more often, and I think 0 is going to turn out to be a sort of arbitrary cutoff. But related to that, has CAISO done any studies? So we've now set these conservative DEBs, and if they are conservative, well, I shouldn't say that. Has CAISO done any studies of actual bidding behavior of resources relative to the DEBs? So one interesting test would be, if you apply these during hours, you're pretty confident there's no market power. The resources should always be bidding below the DEBs. And even during market power periods, if they are resources you think have no incentive to exercise market power, such as the below 5 megawatts, or the net buyer portfolios, you would think that they would be bidding below the DEBs. It would just be reassuring to know that it actually is ending up being conservative in situations where you're pretty confident they're not exercising market power.
Yeah, no, that's a great suggestion, and it's something I'm not sure if we've looked into that too far to date. Part of the challenge has been we've had very few of these resources in the market, but clearly as we go forward, that's something we can look at to see the effectiveness of the DEB. That's a good suggestion.
Yeah. And then I'll just make a comment. I like the idea of exempting the 5 megawatt and below. I like the idea of thinking more broadly about that direction. Since I've come on the board, I haven't understood why we mitigate all market participants when there are market power situations, including market participants who, I understand there's some process issues of trying to figure out who you would exempt, but it seems that this approach of some safe harbor resources could be applied more broadly.
Yeah, no, I agree, and that's something that I think we can definitely consider as we do future enhancements to our market power mitigation measures.
Thanks.
And Greg, can you just remind us what we'll be looking at next year for hybrid resources?
Yeah, so for hybrids, if you recall, we had the two models for the hybrid resource. We have the co-located model and the hybrid model. So the co-located model, I believe, was implemented, I want to say December 11th. Yeah, I may be off by a couple of days there, but that's in place now, and I believe we actually have a resource or two that are utilizing that model. So that will be what we'll use to manage those resources through next fall, and then next fall we will be adding the hybrid model as well, which is where the resources, the difference being the co-located, where we're optimizing the resources separately, as the hybrid, the resource owner is doing the management of those combined resources and bidding them in as a single resource. But that'll be coming along next fall is when we're planning to implement that.
Right. Thank you.
Okay, great. So we already heard from John Prescott in the AM governing body approval. Now we have Ryan Kurilinski from the Department of Market Monitoring and his comments, please.
Ryan,
Hi, this is Ryan Kurilinski from the Department of Market Monitoring. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ryan, we can.
All right.
Yes.
Great. All right, thank you, Chair Golitova and Board of Governors, for the opportunity to comment on the ISO's storage default energy bid proposal. DMM supports the ISO's proposal. Many storage resources there are in areas that are frequently uncompetitive, so it's important for the ISO to be able to mitigate them when they are contributing to the exercise of market power. We think there may be some more sophisticated ways that could be developed to estimate opportunity costs used in the real-time default energy bids, and for a few different reasons. The ISO's proposed method may create default energy bids that could be systematically a little higher than actual storage marginal costs. But we agree with the ISO that estimating marginal costs of storage resources is really complex. So we will continue to encourage the ISO to keep working with the DMM, the MSC, and stakeholders to refine storage default energy bids going forward. But we think starting out with, storage market power mitigation processes that insert bids that may be a little higher than storage marginal cost is a major step forward from the status quo of the ISO not being able to mitigate storage resources at all. So we support the proposal. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan? Any questions for Ryan?
I have a question. I'm not sure if this is for Ryan, but it sounds like this is an ongoing process. Is there an open stakeholder initiative to consider revisions to the DevPriv storage, or is that something we're going to think about doing later on?
Yeah, hi, this is Greg. I can answer that. But yeah, no, there is currently not. I think what we would be doing going forward is, once we gain some experience with this new default energy bid, do some of the analysis like Severin was suggesting. I think that will give us some pretty clear indications as to, how effective the default energy bid is. Another good indicator, if we're seeing a lot of resources that are opting for the negotiated option, clearly that would be another signal that there's some issues with the default energy bid, and that'll also provide a lot of information as to where the current approach may be lacking, and that we could address improvements in the future. So I think once we gather that information, we would assess that as to whether it really warranted us for reopening this and making some modifications to make it more accurate as we go forward.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, great. Now we can open the item for public comment. Do we have any comment from the public? Any questions?
As a reminder, pressing pound 2 on your telephone keypad will indicate you wish to make a statement. We do have a statement on the line. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you. Please state your name and affiliation. Thank you.
Hello, and good morning, Chair Galitova and Governors. My name is Kathleen Colbert. I'm the Director of CAISO Market Policy at VISTRA. VISTRA appreciates the opportunity to provide remarks to the Board of Governors on management storage debt proposal. We also submitted a letter to the Board, as you mentioned earlier today. I would like to highlight a few key points that we made in our letter. For context, currently we provide 1,185 megawatts of generation in Moss Landing and Oakland. We are expanding our fleet to include storage. By Q4 of 2021, our storage generation will be 436 megawatts, with more expected in the future. Our actions further progress toward California Assembly Bill 2514 storage mandate and Senate Bill 100's transition to 100% clean energy by 2045. Effectively integrating storage in CAISO markets is vital to the success of storage deployment. However, prematurely adopting a policy that could result in undervaluing storage could undermine this success. VISTRA cannot support this proposal as is. We were disappointed CAISO did not address our concerns during its stakeholder process, but I want to thank CAISO management for acknowledging and responding to our letter today. We greatly appreciate that. What primarily concerns us is that in September, CAISO updated its proposal to exempt from mitigation certain storage resources, small storage, within a net buyer's portfolio. Practically, 3 months is insufficient to stakeholder a controversial policy item such as this. We want to share with the Board of Governors that we expect CAISO will face an uphill battle at FERC. Based on our experience, we think FERC will struggle with questions this exemption raise, such as why the same size storage, depending on whether hybrid or standalone, are treated differently, why the same size non-storage and storage are treated differently, and why a 6 megawatt storage versus a 5 megawatt storage is treated differently. FERC will need to resolve these questions to approve the proposal. CAISO provided the rationale that small resources may not have the ability to exercise market power and that an inaccurate DEB could be harmful. We find CAISO's rationale does not sufficiently answer these questions, signaling this proposal is not ready for approval. Further, the proposal did not include any discussion on whether mitigation will apply differently to standalone or hybrid storage. I appreciate management clarifying today that it will review the mitigation rules as they apply to hybrids in a future process. We still believe that this policy or a future policy should be revised to make clear how mitigation would apply to both hybrid and standalone storage, including justifying any differential treatment. We believe that CAISO should align the implementation of any mitigation applied to hybrid or standalone storage to be implemented in the market around the same time. VISTRA respectfully urges the board to delay your decision to allow CAISO to more fully address stakeholder concerns. As an alternative, we would also urge the board to request CAISO to commit to including this further review that the management discussed during its presentation in a future project within a reasonable time after implementation. Thank you for your consideration, and I want to wish you all a happy holiday season as well.
Thank you so much. Do we have a response from management? And I would like to point out that the ISO, even when we do adopt any kind of measures or proposals, we periodically review them, and there's always opportunities for updating and fine-tuning.
Yeah, I can add a little to my earlier comments to that. You know, I think I already responded to most of their concerns. You know, a couple of the comments made, you know, why are we treating storage different from non-storage, you know, for this, you know, our exemption for the small storage resources? You know, I think the primary reason there, in which again, I think this was also noted by the Market Surveillance Committee, was it is very complex trying to come up with default energy bids for storage resources because of the, you know, particularly the complexities in trying to estimate what their marginal costs are. So as a result of that, you know, which is very different from, say, a very small gas resource where it's, you know, somewhat straightforward. So, you know, therefore, you know, I think there are advantages if you don't need to mitigate these resources, particularly those small ones that have no ability to exercise market power, that you're better off because they can then have better information as to what their true marginal costs are and bid those into the market. So, you know, I think there is a good rationale for why we can treat storage different from non-storage. However, going forward, I think, you know, as Severin noted, that there is an argument as to, you know, whether we need to be applying our mitigation as broadly as we do, but that's, you know, the currently approved process that we have in our tariff today. And then, you know, the other comment that on hybrids that we should, you know, align. I think Kathleen's comment was really that we should align the mitigation of hybrid market power mitigation with implementation of storage mitigation. You know, again, you know, our comment there is we have a lot of storage resources coming on the system relatively quickly. You know, initially they will either be standalone storage or under our co-located option. And, you know, furthermore, it's going to be very different and complex to how we would apply market power mitigation to hybrid resources. We have an initiative plan to design and develop those mitigation measures. There will be some time difference between when we are able to apply the mitigation to the hybrids versus the standalone storage. We acknowledge that, but we don't think that's a good reason to not apply the mitigation to storage resources again, which are going to start becoming a significant part of our generation fleet. There may be, you know, year lag difference between when we have the storage mitigation go into effect versus the mitigation for the hybrids, but, you know, again, we don't think that justifies that we should not move forward with the mitigation that we're proposing here today.
Thank you, Greg. Any other comments?
I have a question for Kathleen.
Okay.
Kathleen, I noticed you submitted this letter last night or yesterday. And I was just wondering, is there a reason you're submitting it at such a last minute? You know, this is a long letter with a lot of content, and it seems less than ideal to submit it right before the meeting. Like a week earlier would have given us more chance to consider it.
Governor Bornstein, thank you for the question, and I appreciate it, and I also want to apologize for submitting this letter late last night. While this is maybe not a satisfactory response, I will note that the regulatory framework going on right now in California is quite pressing, and we are actively involved in the emergency reliability order instituting rulemaking at the CPUC, as well as there's been a recent CEC workshop related to incremental efficiency improvements being explored for the natural gas fleet, among other proceedings that are highly important, as well as at the CAISO. And so while our letter was submitted late, and it's something that I will make sure and commit to the board to ensure that as any future letter is submitted in a more timely manner, I do ask for your understanding that right now there are the stakeholder schedules and timelines are quite compressed, and that that is the main driver, the deadlines around the other emergency proceedings. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm not scolding you. I'm just wondering if there was some institutional barrier that kept you from submitting it earlier. I certainly understand the process and how busy things are right now, and I hope you'll understand that it's hard for us to really internalize things that are submitted at the last minute. But I still appreciate your comments and your thoughts on this. Thanks.
Thank you. Perhaps it would make sense then to schedule an update on this item for about 4 to 6 months from now, have it on the agenda, and have management provide us a quick update on where we stand.
This is Anna. Yes, we can do that. We're certainly happy to provide an update after some time. I'm not sure about the exact time, but 4 to 6 months time frame. We'll take that back and provide you.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, there's nothing hard. Whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
And makes sense. Yes. Thank you, Anna McKenna.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional public comment?
We do have additional questions. Caller, your line is now unmuted. Go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Good morning, Board of Governors. This is Jin No with the California Energy Storage Alliance. And I just wanted to take this time to express general support for the ISO staff's proposal. I think it represents a reasonable starting point, and we've appreciated the time to work with staff to develop a default energy bid framework for storage assets. I think with that said, we do think there's should be future opportunities for enhancements to reconsider some of the energy cost assumptions at a future time, because the energy storage resources being subject to market power mitigation may sometimes be operating to deliver other types of use cases like ancillary services, or they may be subject to market power mitigation, but and look uneconomic, but be delivering valuable grid services. As well, we think there may be future opportunities for refinements related to the current formulation of the real-time default energy bid. I know there was a mention of convergence of real-time and day-ahead pricing, but there may be instances where the marginal costs of the resource may not necessarily be reflected through the default energy bid. And so I think there are future opportunities to refine this, but at this time, CISA is supportive and look forward to working with staff further. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, definitely. There will be enhancements and improvements as we develop the program, certainly. We want to have the best program that there could be out there, and we'll be dedicated to ensuring that we've got a path forward for energy storage to be incorporated into our grid as much as possible. Any additional comments?
So this is Raj Bhagwat. My suggestion would be, since staff is now committed, management is committed to bring back a update item 4 to 6 months from now. If you see issues coming up, please do inform us in advance of that meeting so that we're aware.
Yes, absolutely. This is Anna McKenna again. I think, I think as you have all noted, this is ensuring storage can operate reliably into our system, and supporting them through that process is a big priority for us. And absolutely, we will come back to you and advise you and inform you of any issues we see coming along in this area or other areas as these things materialize over time. And as you all know, we have a significant amount of storage coming in next summer, and so these are things we're looking at very closely, and we'll bring back the issues to the board as these things become evident to us.
Yeah.
Can I ask Jen's point on opportunity cost of providing other services? Did that come up in the process? And it's not part of the cost analysis, is my understanding, but it seems like that could be a serious issue at some point. But you folks know better than I do, and Jen knows better than I do. Greg or Anna or Jen?
Greg, I'm not sure. Greg, would you like to respond to that?
Did we lose Greg?
I would think it is definitely something we can look into the future. We want to be able to pull all capabilities.
Hi, this is Greg. Sorry, I got dropped. I'm back now. Yeah, to answer the question, no, this is not, it's not something that we necessarily considered as part of the default opportunity cost calculation in our methodology. That being said, my answer to that would be if they do feel that they have legitimate opportunity costs that are a function of providing other services, that's another reason why we have that negotiated option. They can come in, and if they can demonstrate that, that's something we can consider for establishing their opportunity cost.
This must come up with gas plants too, that they have an option to provide other services, and they justify a higher bid based on that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it also depends on whether these are resource adequacy resources or not as well. If they're resource adequacy resources, then they have that that obligation to the ISO first. So those are things we need to consider, which largely I think most of these will be.
Okay. Additional comments?
I just had a quick question for Greg. This is Mary. Assuming that we support this today, how soon will you begin to accept opportunities? How soon will the program begin?
Well, we would be implementing this in the fall of 2021. So, it would be immediately after that's when we would start. Well, prior to that, we would actually likely start the process if resources wanted to apply for negotiated default energy bids.
So that would begin now?
Well, likely once we have the FERC approval of this policy. So, it's probably a few months down the road. We would once we have FERC approval, then we could establish the internal processes for the negotiation.
Yeah, we haven't really.
Bids.
This is Anna McKenna. How it normally works when we have these kind of implementation or of new default energy bids or negotiated options is that we will have a lead time under which we'll have to start establishing those parameters for the resources. We haven't really, established that glide path yet, but it does take some time before go live to make sure that you have all those things in place. But I think it may be a little early, as Greg said, at this point. Once FERC approves the policy, those things will start coming into play.
So realistically by spring?
In terms of the negotiations?
Yeah.
Okay. So you'll provide us an update.
Yeah, I think that's some of the stuff that because that's why I mentioned earlier that the 4 to 6 month time frame, it is a little bit early that, we will have not had yet implemented this. But what we can do in that time frame is provide information as to where we are and where this is heading, and if we learn anything new, as I noted earlier, if there's something that issues that we become aware of, we'll do that, and then provide. Once we go live with this, we'll have a better understanding as to what if there are issues with its implementation. That's not going to happen until later. So the briefing will include, those kinds of issues before go live.
Okay.
This is Ash. One thing, I don't think I'd really wrapped my mind around the implementation schedule. So there will be no market mitigation measures in place for storage during the summer of 2021.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. Any other comments?
We have none at this time.
Are we ready for a board decision? Roger?
Yes, I will read the decision. Moves the ISO Board of Governors approves the tariff revisions necessary to implement the proposal to apply local market power mitigation measures to storage resources and the formulation of a default energy bid for storage resources as described in the memorandum dated December 9, 2020, and move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposed revisions, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment.
So moved.
Motion? That was Ash moved. Second?
Yep.
Second.
Second is Sever. Governor Gortova, your vote.
Aye.
Governor Bogwat?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
And Governor Bornstein?
Aye.
Thank you, Governors. The motion passes.
Thank you, everyone. Item number 8, again, Anna McKenna, decision on real-time settlement review proposal.
Well, thank you, Chair Gatlova. I am happy today to be presenting, I won't be presenting, sorry, but Brett Cooper, our Senior Manager of Market Design Policy, will be presenting to you a proposed change to our real-time market rules. Settlement rules. And this initiative was an initiative we put in place. I just wanted to highlight for you all that we put in place to look at cost shifting issues that between balancing authority areas that came out of our efforts last year and looking at some of our real-time settlement allocation rules. And we committed to doing this, and we provided 3 changes, 2 of which you've now approved under the consent agenda. The third item is to modify how we allocate costs incurred related to real-time bid cost recovery. And as I said, Brett Cooper is on the line, and he will be providing you a presentation of our management's proposal. Brad?
Good morning, Chair Gatlova and Governors. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, first slide, please. Yeah, as Anna said, we're proposing to modify the allocation of real-time market bid cost recovery costs between balancing authority areas in the EIM. Like as Anna said, this is one of several changes that came out of our recent real-time settlement review stakeholder process, which the EIM governing body approved a few of these changes under their primary approval authority or on your consent agenda. The fourth item is this bid cost recovery item. This initiative came out of an initiative last year where we addressed some cost shifting that was going on in the EIM. That was called our real-time market neutrality settlement initiative, and we committed to doing a more comprehensive review of cost shifting. So we developed metrics and we reviewed issues stakeholders brought up, and this issue with the bid cost recovery came to light as part of that review. Next slide, please. So just as background, bid cost recovery is a make-whole payment the ISO market makes to resources to cover their bid-in costs. For example, market payments at the locational marginal price may not cover all their costs. Typically, these can be startup and minimum load costs that aren't covered with the energy payment at the locational marginal cost. These real-time market bid cost recovery costs that we pay out to the resources are then allocated to the balancing authority area in the EIM in which the generator that they're paid to or in which they are incurred. But then a portion of these costs are allocated to other balancing authority areas in the EIM, currently based on energy transfers or EIM dispatched energy transfers, uninstructed to balance energy, and unaccounted for energy. In the CALISO BAA, we in turn allocate those costs to load and exports. We've looked at different methods of allocating these costs. We had a stakeholder initiative a few years ago, in fact, to look at that, and we concluded that load and exports is the appropriate way to allocate these costs within our BAA because bid cost recovery can be incurred for a variety of reasons, and the methodology most consistent with cost causation is to allocate it to the beneficiary, which is demand, or in other words, load and exports. Other BAAs in the EIM allocate them according to methodologies that are specified in their open access transmission tariffs. Next slide, please. So we propose to enhance this allocation of bid cost recovery costs between balancing authority areas. We will continue to allocate the cost to the balancing authority area at which they're incurred, but then we're proposing to reduce that allocation to a balancing authority area based on its quantity of transfers out compared to its demand. We propose to no longer consider uninstructed to balance energy and unaccounted for energy in this allocation. The reason we're doing this is this proportion of energy transfers compared to the demand, that fully accounts for the bid cost recovery costs incurred to send energy to another balancing authority area. So there is no need to use uninstructed to balance energy and unaccounted for energy to account for these costs. Then these costs that are reduced, they go into a pot, so to speak, and we would retain the existing rule that allocates these costs to balancing authority areas based on the ratio of each balancing authority area's transfers in to the total balancing authority area transfers. So balancing authority areas receive a share of these costs allocated out from one balancing authority area based on their proportion of transfers into balancing authority areas. So next slide, please. So in summary, we request that you approve our bid cost recovery cost allocation proposal. This proposal better reflects cost causation. It reflects our commitment to address cost shifting in the real-time market, and stakeholders support the proposal, stating that it's an improvement and more accurately reflects cost causation. And I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Brad. Any questions from the board? Okay. We have already had the EIM governing body advisory opinion and the positive from John Prescott. So if we could please have Mr. Ryan Kurilinski again for the opinion of the Department of Market Monitoring comments.
Hello, and thanks again, Chair Galitova and Board of Governors. This is Ryan Kurilinski from the Department of Market Monitoring. We support the ISO's proposal here to change how EIM transfers impact how the big cost recovery paid to generators in one balancing area gets allocated to other balancing areas. We agree with the ISO and stakeholders that the proposal should better align the allocation of who pays for VCR uplift with what causes these uplift costs to be incurred. Also, because the proposal should reduce the amount of VCR paid to generators in a given balancing area that then gets allocated to other areas, we think the proposed change has the added benefit of reducing potential incentives to inflate big cost recovery. So DMM supports the proposal, and I would be happy to try to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Any questions for Ryan? Okay, moving on to public comments.
As a reminder, pressing pound 2 will indicate you wish to make a comment. We have none at this time.
Great. Are we ready for a motion then?
It sounds like we are, if there's no other comments from the board. Okay. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the real-time settlement review proposal as described in the memorandum dated December 9, 2020. Move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal described in the memorandum, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance and any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment.
I'll move.
Thank you, Chair Galitova. Second?
Second, Severin.
Thank you.
And Roger, operator, if you could please unmute Mary Leslie's line. Mary, if you could either raise your hand. Can you raise your hand or?
Let's test that and see if you can vote. Mary, your vote?
Operator, if you can unmute.
Thumbs up is an aye. I want to note for the record that Governor Leslie had a thumbs up.
Would you please press pound 2?
Oh, it's 2 thumbs up. Governor Galitova, your vote?
Aye.
Governor Bagwat?
Hi. So I do want to know, Roger, what order you're calling people on, because I feel like you have a random number generator.
You know, honestly, for whatever reason, your pictures keep changing on the top of my screen as to their order, and I'm going in the order. And I was wondering, I almost commented on that, and I thought, oh, no one's going to care. I got to keep you guys on your toes.
I thought you were going backwards and forwards, but that's okay.
Well, sometimes I'm just going backwards, but if that's causing any consternation, I'll be happy to stick into the same order. I'm probably just keeping myself entertained too. Governor Borenstein, your vote?
Aye. And I was wondering exactly the same thing, but I think it's a good idea to randomize.
Well, people will say
I'm off the later.
Right. Okay. Well, that is 4-0 no matter which direction you go.
Okay, great. Moving on, next item. Decision on 2021 system reliability must-run requirements. Neil Millar. Neil, are you there?
Hey, Neil, can we get you to hit #2 so we can identify your line so we can unmute you, please?
Or Jeff Billington.
Am I live?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Apologies for the delay there. Good morning, Chair Glitova, Governors. Yes, this is Neil. And thank you. I will introduce this decision item today. Management is seeking authorization to proceed with a reliability must-run designation for the Midway Sunset Cogeneration Facility today. And this is to retain access to generation that would otherwise not be available for 2021. This is a unique request as, unlike past requests, this is driven by system needs and not by a local capacity issue. Because of that, we do not take this request lightly. I do want to emphasize that the request is based on the analysis underpinning other ISO activities supporting our preparation for the summer of 2021 and beyond. So with that, I'll ask Jeff Billington, our Director of Transmission Infrastructure Planning, to present the recommendation itself. Thank you.
And let me interject just briefly for the record that we did receive a public comment letter on this item from Midway Sunset Cogeneration Company, actually sent on their behalf by the law firm of Stoll Reeves. And that comment letter has been provided to the board. So with that, let me turn it to you, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. And good morning, Chair Glitova and members of the board. I'll present the decision item on the must-run for Midway Sunset 2021, as Neil indicated. Next slide. Midway Sunset Cogen consists of 3 units with a total capacity of 248 megawatts. The owner of Midway Sunset Cogeneration Company provided retirement mothball notice requesting to mothball the generators as of December 31st, 2020. The request was denied as the resources were found to be required to meet the 2021 system-wide reliability needs. These needs include maintaining contingency reserve requirements per BAL 002 reliability standards, as well as unloaded capacity to meet the operating needs for BAL 001 and BAL 003 reliability standards. If the resource secures resource adequacy contracts in the meantime, the RMR contract would not be executed. Next slide, please. The ISO has determined that a 20% margin is needed to maintain reliability standard requirements on a forecast basis. This includes contingency reserves of not less than 6% of the expected load are required for BAL 002 reliability standards. In addition, to meet the reliability standards, all resources must be operational in real time. The current ISO resource mix has an overall outage rate of around 10%. And in addition, load forecast variability must be accounted for. The 1 and 2 load forecast is used as the baseline, so an allowance of 4% for load variations accommodates up to a 1 in 5 load forecast level. Taking these into account derives the 20% margin. Next slide, please. The ISO has undertaken a stack analysis of the total resources to meet the forecast load of the summer months of 2021. In addition to the peak hour, the analysis also looked at the hour ending 8 p.m. represented in the table, where the solar resources are reasonably assumed to be 0, recognizing the minimal solar output at the end of the hour or throughout the hour. The analysis also considered all of the resources to be at their net qualifying capacity. It also included the new resources that are scheduled to be online by summer 2021. As well, the resource adequacy imports were based on the average resource adequacy monthly showings for the last 5 years. And if we're looking at the table, column F provides the total resource stack capability that is either above or below the forecast load level at hour ending 8 plus the 20% margin. And so as you can see in the red for July through September, it falls below the 20% requirement. Next slide, please. And so as I indicated in the previous slide, the months July through September, the resource stack falls below the 20% margin. This is even with Midway Sunset Cogen assumed in service, indicating there is insufficient capacity to meet the 20% margin found by the ISO to be needed to meet the BAL 002 requirements on the forecast basis. In addition, we also considered a sensitivity with the monthly maximum resource adequacy import showings over the past 5 years instead of the average contracted imports. With this, the margin would only reach 18% for September. The other months would be above, but for September it would only reach 18%. Next slide, please. In regards to stakeholder engagement, due to the timing of the submission of the resource adequacy year-ahead showings on October 31st and the initial release of the resource stack analysis on November 30th, 2020, the ISO has not presented the situation to stakeholders in public settings, and comments received after the posting of the memo we can discuss herein. And next slide. So based upon the analysis that we've conducted, the ISO management recommends designation of reliability must-run services to establish must-run contracts for 2021 based on system capacity requirements for the Midway Sunset Cogen. And in addition, management will report back the results of the reliability must-run contracts at the next board meeting. So that concludes the presentation on the need for the must-run for Midway Sunset Cogen.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Any questions from the board?
I have a comment more than a question. I having been briefed on this and thought about it a lot, I support this. I personally think that this isn't how we should be doing this planning. I realize this is a very short-run contingency, but I support the attempt to get beyond simple planning reserve margins and do a more granular analysis so that we aren't just using rules of thumb, but actually using something that really translates to real probabilities of outages. And so this is great. This will help for this year, but I think we need to move to much more sophisticated reserve margin planning.
Thank you. Agreed.
Yes,
any other comments?
I was just going to agree with what Severn just said, and also the public comment period that you noted that we really didn't have one for this due to the timing, and I'm wondering, today we are going to receive comment.
Yes, it's Neil here. I would just like to provide some additional follow-up, if I could, that yes, we also agree this is not the situation we want to be in. We do not want to be pursuing this type of reliability must-run designation. We do look at the circumstances and unfortunately think we have to step forward with this recommendation at this time. I just wanted to spend a minute on the timing issue as well. Part of that is that several years ago, the ISO developed a more structured approach that was voluntary for people that were looking at retiring or mothballing generation to approach us as early as February of the year ahead of the year the unit would not be available. And that would allow for a more measured process of assessment, more timely for everyone involved to get an answer about the need for the generator, more opportunity for load-serving entities that might be interested in procuring a contract, and more opportunity to get key issues like actual cost of service rates established for the generator. That is optional. The generators are not obliged under the terms and conditions to provide more than 90 days notice. When that notice is received, we've also established a transparent process of making sure that all incoming retirement or mothball requests are visible to stakeholders. And but at the same time, we also don't want to act prematurely so that people can get every opportunity to find a contracting party for these resources rather than go down the path. But that 90-day notice provision that gives us only 90 days to come to this decision or not is tight, but we also don't want to move too quickly because we want to ensure that the load-serving entities have every opportunity before we get involved in starting to pursue an RMR designation. This board meeting is our last opportunity before the end of the year, which is when the 90 days come due. So I totally agree with the comments and the concerns about timing. It's something we look to avoid to the greatest extent possible. And we do have to live, however, within the worst case scenario of only getting 90 days notice. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Neil. Okay. Public comment? Do we have any public comment on this item?
As a reminder, pressing pound 2 will indicate you wish to make a comment. We do have one. Caller, your line has been unmuted. Go ahead.
Good morning, ISO board.
Operator, I think you unmuted 2 lines. Go ahead, Eric.
I heard Eric Eisen, but...
Yeah, Eric, go ahead. Operator, can you unmute the line, please?
Your line is now unmuted. Go ahead.
This is Eric Eisenman. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, CAISO board. First, thank you to Jeff and Neil for their work on this, for their comments on this. This is getting really complicated and complex, and it's a tough situation for all of us. So, PG&E recognizes and appreciates the work that the CAISO does to maintain the reliability of the grid. And there are a lot of moving parts right now that is making that responsibility a lot more complicated. With respect to the proposed RMR designation for Midway that's before you for consideration, PG&E takes no position because we don't have enough information and haven't had sufficient time to review it, and I understand the context in which Neil discussed that. But in the context of this designation and the designation of the Greenleaf facility earlier this year, PG&E has some thoughts on the RMR process. I say this to be constructive and with a desire to collaborate with CAISO management and other stakeholders. First, the punchline. The RMR process needs to be updated and improved, especially that we are now looking at system RMRs. Therefore, PG&E requests that the stakeholder process begin early in the new year to address the reliability criteria used for RMR designations under the CAISO's tariff authority, creation of the clear process to evaluate the RMR costs against the alternatives, and ensuring that there is sufficient time needed to review RMR designations. Now for some background and context. PG&E supports the ISO taking actions to support reliability, but the basis for these actions needs to be transparent and properly and timely discussed with stakeholders, including understanding the costs and alternatives to issuing RMR designations. It's also important that resource owners understand that RMRs are meant to be a last resort tool to be used judiciously by the CAISO. Rather, resource owners should be incented to enter transactions with LSEs. In September 2019, FERC issued an order on RMR tariff provisions. When that order was issued, Commissioner Glick made some comments, and I'd like to share some of those comments, remind you of those comments. And here's what he said. The Commission has explained repeatedly that retaining individual resources through out-of-market RMR agreements should be a measure of last resort and appropriate only where market-based mechanisms have failed to provide the service in question. CAISO has not enumerated the criteria or studies that it would use to determine whether there is a reliability need or how it would determine whether the procurement of a specific resource is necessary or appropriate solution for that reliability need. CAISO's proposal, by contrast, does not appear to tie the availability of an RMR agreement to the development of a replacement solution, which could in effect allow the RMR agreement to remain in effect in perpetuity. That's the end of what I'm reading from Commissioner Glick. PG&E finds a lot of wisdom in Commissioner Glick's comments. They are applicable to the current market and RMR paradigm that we see now. The potential for many RMR designations requires all of us to work together to develop the very best RMR policy. Otherwise, we may end up with many RMRs with costs that are not just and reasonable. It will not be a good outcome for the CAISO to be in the role of continually designating resources as RMRs. I can't emphasize enough that I'd like my comments to be viewed constructively. PG&E looks forward to working with the ISO and all stakeholders to find solutions that ensure grid reliability and make sense for California electric customers. Thank you for your attention and your time.
Thank you, Eric. Any questions or comments for Eric?
I'd just like to say I appreciate that Eric is reminding us of what this is used for. And I feel like we just got schooled a little bit, but I think we agree that we have to approach this in a more thoughtful way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry.
Josh, and I want to confirm that I think everyone on the board agrees that RMR should be an absolute last resort, and we need solutions to make sure that the need doesn't arise frequently. I'm not sure that reforms to the RMR process, maybe that's part of it, but it's part of a bigger problem.
It's Neil here. I was just also perhaps offering a few responses as well to Eric's comments, if I may.
Sure, Neil.
Okay, thank you. Yes, first off, I'd say I agree with Eric about the concerns he was raising. We totally agree that the RMR should be a last resort. As I mentioned, though, we're faced with the impending loss of generation down to days from when the notice would take effect. So we totally agree with the last resort nature of the RMR feature. And I also totally agree with the comments that we're concerned that the solution here isn't more time on the RMR process, but on avoiding needing the RMR in the first place, because that to us is the ideal solution, as that we're not put in this position. However well designed the RMR process is, it is truly a last resort and something we don't want to execute. I do believe in this case we have also addressed the specific concerns that Eric outlined about the comments regarding criteria and standards. This request is tied to reasonable assumptions to plan for operating criteria that we are bound to in the operating theater. So we are taking that part of the request very seriously. We would also really like hearing other ideas going forward. I don't think it's fair to commit right now to an entire stakeholder process around an RMR process, but we would like to hear the thoughts PG&E have on how to refine the process and to see if a further stakeholder process around that would be appropriate. But at this time, like I said, we would like to hear those ideas first. I hope that helps provide some context.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
May I respond?
Yes, Eric.
Please.
So, thank you, Neil, and I appreciate the engagement we've already had on this topic, and I'll commit to you that we'll work on our ideas and share them with you soon. I also look forward to the next board meeting when you'll consider this topic again. So just thank you for the comments from Governor Bagua, Governor Leslie. This is part of a bigger matter dealing with procurement system supply. I don't want to get into any of that. I tried to keep my comments narrow to the RMR process. So you will continue to hear from PG&E on this topic, and thanks for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Eric, and we look forward to hearing from you. Any additional public comment?
Good morning. This is Dawn. Good morning. This is Dawn from Southern California Edison. Thank you for the opportunity to comment on this item. I will be echoing concerns regarding lack of process. First of all, SCE appreciates the ISO taking action to support reliability for the summer of 2021. And SCE does not object to the CAISO seeking reliability must-run resources if it sees a clear need. However, as a basis for this particular request, the ISO states that it considers that a 20% margin applied to a 1 and 2 load level is necessary to provide reliable service pursuant to the contingency reserve provisions. Stakeholders need more discussion before any changes are made to the planning reserve margin. This issue is in fact under discussion in other forums, as Mr. Mainzer has mentioned. Therefore, the award of this RMR designation should in no way be seen as an endorsement of the 20% planning reserve margin. So with that understanding, SCE does not object to the proposed RMR designation. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil, do you want to respond?
Yes, I'd be pleased to. Totally agree that these issues are also being examined. The analysis I referred to has also been submitted into the CPUC proceeding relating to the summer of 2021 preparedness. And we know that that's an issue that some people want to discuss and debate. I should mention, as Jeff noted in his presentation, we also included sensitivities at a 15% planning reserve margin, also showing the need for these resources. So while we appreciate that there's some debate around the 20% value itself, that's not the sole determinant in this need. So there are a number of moving parts, but I think the sensitivity we included also demonstrates that there's the need for this designation.
Thank you, Neil. Any additional comments from the public or the board? Okay, I think we're ready for a motion, Roger. There is a lack of process, but obviously there's also a need, and reliability trumps everything. So let's go ahead and have the board motion forward.
Okay. Move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to designate the Midway Sunset Cogen units for reliability must-run service, contingent upon execution of a reliability must-run contract with rates, terms, and conditions acceptable to management, as described in the memorandum dated December 9, 2020. Motion?
So moved.
I'll be second.
Josh. Angelina is second. And in alphabetical order, Governor Bogwat.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Governor Galitova.
Aye.
Governor Leslie.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes.
Okay, great. Well, we are ahead of schedule a little bit. It is 10:25. We've been going on for almost 2 hours. So I would suggest we take a 5-minute break and return at 10:30. Please mute your mics. Do not turn off your video cameras. And we'll resume again in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so we just have Ash.
So, still waiting for Governor Borenstein and Governor Leslie.
Severin is here.
Oh, okay.
I'm also here.
Mary's here, just not seeing him. Right.
Wait, gosh.
You not see me?
We don't see you, Mary. Now we see you.
Yay. Wow.
Now, Roger was suspicious that I just put a movie up of me sitting here and that it wasn't really me.
Right.
How about if I hold up today's cover?
You could just get wallpaper views.
Cardboard cutout that he is.
Okay, we'll wait. Oh, there's Ash. Okay, so we can get started. It's 10:32, and
it all got present.
You can see all of us, right, Roger? You don't need to take roll again.
No.
Okay.
I was just noting a record that all governors are present.
Wonderful. Item number 10, decision on 2021 budget. Ryan Segasio.
Good morning, governors. We are here today to bring the proposed final budget for 2021, also known as our revenue requirement. I'm happy to report that there has been no material changes from the draft budget that's been out publicly now for about 6 weeks, and that we briefed you on back in November and stakeholders. We've made some fine-tuning to the details internally. We've updated some language, narrative around the corporate reorg in the budget book that's part of your materials. And we've updated the volume forecasts, which impact the rates that you'll see at the end of April's presentation. Before I turn it over to April, I just want to point out that we did receive late last week FERC's approval on our cost of service study filing, which updates all the formula rates and fees and the tariff. So that concluded a very successful process this year. And this presentation now incorporates those formulas for the rate calculation. So April, take it away.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Good morning, governors. I'll take you through the 2021 budget that we'll be requesting for approval effective January 1. Next slide, please. The 2021 budget really is a work of many components, but it's really the diversified revenue streams that are the superstars here because they're helping to reduce our revenue requirement to the tune of $5.4 million less than the prior year's revenue requirement. And with the diversified revenue streams, we're able to offset the increase that we're seeing in O&M budget due to budgeted merit increases, additional staff, as well as for non-personnel costs such as subscription costs for the services that we're providing. The new revenue that we're bringing into 2021 is our nodal pricing model fee, which I'll go into more detail later. We're also going to be bringing on board a couple new EIM entities in which their revenue will help lower the revenue requirement overall. Next slide, please. Our GMC revenue requirement consists of 5 different components. The first 3 components that you see on this slide are really our cost drivers. These are the funds we need to be able to provide the services that we provide to our stakeholders. The next 2 components, on the bottom 2, those are our offsets to the revenue requirement. The first component is by far the largest component, which is our operations and maintenance budget. At $200.8 million for 2021, this component is coming in about $5.8 million higher than last year. And I'll go into more detail over those drivers in the next slide. The next component is our debt service. The debt service is remaining flat at $16.9 million in 2021. Our cash-funded capital at $28 million also remains flat over 2020. Our other costs and revenues are coming in $9.2 million more in 2021. I'll go into more detail over those components, or what makes up that amount, in the coming slides. And then our operating cost reserve adjustment is going to bring a $13.6 million decrease to our 2021 revenue requirement. And this really has to do with the favorable outcomes from our operations in 2019. All told, our 2021 budget is coming in at $181.6 million which is $5.4 million less than last year. If you were to take our transmission volume estimates at 237.3 million terawatt hours, that would give you about a 76.53 cent pro forma bundled rate per megawatt hour. Now, just to highlight, that pro forma bundled cost per megawatt hour does not represent a single charge. However, it really is intended to represent a combination of charges a market participant could expect to pay if they were utilizing all of our grid management services, such as market services, system operations, and CRR services. Next slide. Our O&M budget has 6 components to it. The first being our salaries and benefits component, which is for 2021, $150.7 million. Now, this $5 million increase over the 2020 budget is driven by a 3% budgeted merit increase, 10 additional positions, as well as additional compensation for benefits and whatnot. The next component is our occupancy costs and equipment leases. Now, this is coming in at about $100,000 higher than 2021. And then the next component is our telecom hardware software maintenance costs. And this is coming in about $200,000 less than 2020. The real driver for this reduction has to do with negotiated rates going down. Our consultants and contract staff component is coming in $400,000 higher in 2021, and that's really driven by additional needs to support efforts throughout the organization. Outsourced contracts and professional fees is going to increase $300,000, and that's due to insurance premiums as well as other non-personal drivers. Our training, travel, and other costs are coming in $200,000 more, and that has to do with anticipated increases in other areas. All told, at $200.8 million, our 21 budget is a well-rounded budget to support our needs. Next slide. Our debt service at $16.9 million once again remains flat from 2020. Now this component consists of $13.5 million in debt payments due to bondholders and $3.4 million to be collected for required reserves. This amount is a level amount until February 2039. However, we have an opportunity to refinance this bond due to favorable rates, which we are exploring. We're targeting for a kickoff in January 21, and more information will be provided in the next topic to be presented. Next slide. Our capital project budget for 2021 is $28 million. We're going to use $22 million of this amount to fund projects for 2021. These projects will support market, operational, technology enhancements, as well as for other capital projects. The difference of $6 million will be added to our capital reserves, and this component helps to stabilize the revenue requirement year over year. A list of the proposed project is contained within our budget book. Next slide. Our other costs and revenues for 2021 are increasing by $9.2 million. $1.9 million of that would be due to additional EIM market administration charges. Next year, we're going to have a fair amount of new entities join us, which is helping to drive that additional revenue. The new entities are Bank, Phase 2, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Northwestern Energy, Public Service Company of New Mexico, as well as Turlock Irrigation District. The next big driver for the 2021 is our nodal pricing model fee. Now, this fee stems from an agreement between the ISO and PacifiCorp, in which the ISO will provide PacifiCorp with day-ahead optimization systems to provide unified nodal pricing model solution. Interest earnings will see an increase of about $300,000. Our generation interconnection project fees will see an increase of about $200,000. We're also going to see about a $200,000 increase in our scheduling coordinator application and other fees. Now, this increase is primarily driven by the new per registration application fee for scheduling coordinators and for our CRR application fees as part of our cost of service study updates. Our California-Oregon Intertie Path Operator fee will see a reduction of about $1.3 million. This reduction has to do with a reevaluation of our California-Oregon Intertie Path operation services as part of our recent cost of service study. The filing to reduce this fee with our signatory party is underway with FERC and with a target start date in Q1 of 2021. Next slide, please. Our operating cost reserve adjustment is coming in at $13.6 million as a credit to our stakeholders. Once again, this component helps to reduce our GMC revenue requirement. This reduction has to do with over-collections of our GMC and other revenue in 2019, as well as a surplus from our O&M budget. The two combined make up an $11.1 million credit. This $11.1 million credit, in addition to our debt service collection from prior year, and an adjustment for our 15% reserve for O&M budget, all told makes up our 13.6 going into 2021's revenue requirement. Next slide, please. The rates for 2021 are for the most part coming in lower than 2020. This primarily has to do with a lower revenue requirement as well as the adjusted cost service allocation as part of the cost of service study. We are going to see a rate change for our tour fee from 24 cents per megawatt hour to 18 cents per megawatt hour as part of our cost of service study update. And we're also going to see our SCID fees change roughly $500. Once again, that was as an outcome of our cost of service study. The next slide, please. Next, thank you. The timeline for the budget development starts off in July, and it goes through until December. During this, we have many opportunities to take it to the stakeholders for their feedback. For this revenue requirement, we did receive some feedback around from our stakeholders around planned projects for 2021, additional headcount drivers, some financial summary questions, some of the divisional budget increase drivers, as well as some general O&M questions. However, the consensus from the stakeholders were supportive of the GMC revenue requirement. The next step after today's meeting is to post our 2021 GMC and other rates going into 2021 with an effective date of January 1. That concludes my presentation. I do want to give a thank you to all of our internal stakeholders and external stakeholders for their feedback in developing this well-rounded budget going into 2021.
Thank you so much, April and Ryan. This is great. Any comments from the board? Any public comments?
We have none at this time.
Great.
I have a quick question. If April or Ryan, if you know off the top of your head, how does this compare to the other ISO RTOs in terms of growth in the GMC?
Severin, this is April. I don't have that answer for you right now, but I can follow up for you.
Yeah, if it's easy. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it, but I am curious to see how we're doing benchmarked against them. Thanks.
Okay. Roger, I believe we're ready for a motion.
Okay. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the 2021 GMC revenue requirement, capital project budget, and resulting rates as set forth in attachment A of the memorandum dated December 9, 2020. Motion?
Motion.
So moved. Severin, and for second?
Second.
Mary, thank you. Governor Bogwat, your vote?
Aye.
Governor Borenstein?
Aye.
Governor Glitova?
Aye.
Governor Leslie?
Aye.
I was thinking of switching that up on you, Angelina. I could tell you were ready for me, though, so I left it. So,
yes, keep it on our toes, Roger. That's good.
Well, yeah, we have to have all kinds of creative methods during these times. So the motion passes, and thank you, Governor.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 11, decision on refinancing the 2013 bonds. Again, Ryan Sugacio.
Good morning again. So I briefed you on this topic back in early November ahead of the FERC filing, and we've made outstanding progress over the last 6 weeks progressing to get ready to refinance the debt. Today we are asking for your approval to continue the process and you authorizing the incurrence of new debt. If you could go to the next slide, please. So just to give you a quick background again on what we have outstanding. We have $163.4 million in outstanding debt. Those are in the form of a tax-exempt bond issue that was done back in 2013, which was an advance refunding of the 2009 bonds. Those bonds were issued back in 2009 to primarily build the Folsom headquarters. We have annual debt payments of $13.5 million on that debt. That lasts for the next 18 years until February 1st, 2039. The all-in interest cost on the bonds was just under 4.5%, and those bonds are callable on or any time after February of 2023. So we're not yet to the call date, which means we would have to do what's called an advance refunding if we were going to refinance now, which is any type of refinancing ahead of a call date, and I'll explain that here on the next slide. There's really three options we can look at. So right now interest rates are at historical lows. The yield curve is also very flat, so both of those really make refinancing options attractive for long-term debt issuers. There's really three options. We can do what's called a current refunding at the call date. So that's really waiting 2 years and a couple of months until February 2023, and then refinancing at that point. That is the most efficient option. Because you're not going to have to kind of pay up to do things early, but we're exposed to interest rate risk for the next 2 years, 2+ years. And we'll talk some more about that on the sensitivity analysis at the end. We could hedge interest rates, but honestly, it's just not efficient at these interest rate levels. Or we could do an advance refunding now with taxable bonds. The reason we have to use taxable bonds is the IRS has rules around tax-exempt issuance where you can only do one advance refunding in the life of the bond deal. And we've already done that back in 2013. So we would have to use taxable bonds at this point. Next slide. We are proposing moving forward with this taxable structure, this taxable advance refunding structure, mainly because interest rates have fallen by nearly 200 basis points since our 2013 issuance. We kind of put in the memo you've seen that we believe we can do a taxable refinancing right now at roughly 2.6% all in. So compared to the 4.5% that we're currently paying, it's again roughly 2% delta. That is all subject to when we finally price debt, but that is kind of the current market. And really there's a spread between taxable and tax-exempt rates. Typically, you would expect taxable rates to be higher than tax-exempt rates because of the tax exemption. However, those spreads are very tight right now. In fact, most of 2020, that spread has been flipped, where taxable rates are actually lower than tax-exempt rates. And I have a graph on the next slide here where we can see that visually. So this graph here is really interest rates since 2013. It is, I guess the light blue line is the 10-year Treasury rate. That would be a taxable rate. and the dark blue line is 10-year, it says here 10-year MMD, which stands for Municipal Market Data. Essentially, that's the AAA tax-exempt rate. And, you can see that, at least in the recent history, taxable rates tend to be higher than tax-exempt rates. In 2020, that reversed, and really there was a big flight to quality around the COVID pandemic, which caused taxable rates to fall even greater than tax-exempt. And it remains very compressed. You can see at the very tail end of this graph, taxable rates have now gone higher in the 10-year sector than tax-exempt. That's really around the last month of market euphoria over the vaccine, right? You've seen equity markets really rally with the vaccine coming out. If equity markets are rallying, bonds are selling off, and therefore rates have risen. So in any case, the rates remain very compressed, or the spread remains very compressed. So it presents a unique opportunity to do this financing now. One other thing I just want to point out on this before we leave this slide, because we'll talk about it on the sensitivity analysis, is really just the magnitude of interest rate changes. If you look at essentially the end of 2013, where we did the refinancing of these bonds back then, really just about in any 2-year period you look at, you see interest rate movements of 150 to 200 plus basis points, especially in the last couple of years. From the peak of, if you look at the 10-year Treasury at the beginning of 2019, where it was roughly 3.25%, it fell dramatically in 2019. The Fed started to cut rates. There was a lot of concerns about trade. Trade tensions were impacting global economic growth. Rates fell, and then that continued in 2020 with obviously the concerns around the pandemic and the continued concerns around global economic growth. We could speculate on what could turn interest rates around at this point, but I mean, obviously, if the vaccine is successful and we come out of this COVID pandemic, as well as if trade tensions are, settled and resolved in a manner that's acceptable to global, or acceptable to global growth, both of those could be drivers for, rapidly increasing interest rates. So just wanted to kind of set that stage before we move on. So next slide, please. Now, obviously, we're doing the refinancing to save money. You'll see in the next slide some of the savings that we're projecting on an annual basis. But there are some other benefits to refinancing our debt, especially moving into the taxable structure. Briefly, I'll just mention, here's 3 of them. One of them is we'll have some more efficiency around the software utilization between Folsom and Lincoln. Without diving too deep into IRS regulations, the IRS requires us to name by address any site that's going to hold assets that have been financed by tax-exempt financings. Lincoln did not exist in 2013 when we did the refinancing. Therefore, Lincoln is not a named site. It restricts our IT department on what software they can run in Lincoln versus Folsom. There's some wiggle room in a tax ruling that gives us some utilization, but there's a complex effort that's done by ISO staff to monitor which software is being run in which location throughout the year to ensure we don't break the IRS rules. So by converting to taxable bonds, this goes away, and this will be able to fully utilize both locations for software on all databases across the ISO campuses. That's one issue. The other issue is flexibility for the usage of Folsom. So again, IRS tax-exempt financing rules have strict guidelines on private use of a tax-exempt facility. So that's private use would really be any use by anybody other than the ISO, or even use by the ISO that's not specifically related to our main purpose. Now, you wouldn't expect this to be a material need. However, many things rise to the level of private use or are a gray area. Things like the cafeteria. We obviously use a third party to operate the cafeteria. There are a variety of things around employee benefits where you have, whether it be healthcare vendors or financial vendors that come on site to conduct classes for employees. All of those things can rise to the level of private use. So by converting to the taxable structure, we no longer have to be concerned about those types of usage. And finally, we're taking an opportunity to change some of the covenants in the financing. The last two financings around this building, we have pledged the building and our operating revenues as collateral for the debt. By converting to a taxable structure, this will be a standard corporate unsecured issue, which basically it's a promise to pay. And by doing that, it removes a lot of complex administrative items that we deal with on pledging the building and the revenues. For example, the building, there's a lot of cost in the financings. When you're pledging a building, you have to have an appraisal done. You have to have a deed of trust and some title insurance. So it adds cost to the financing. The building never appraises for the value of the bonds anyway. We've talked to investors. They see no value in that, and there's no impact for removing that building from the pledge. The operating revenues pledge creates an administrative nightmare where we're having to actually name every specific bank account that holds operating revenues, sign control agreements with banks and the trustee to turn those accounts over in the event of a bankruptcy. So this just removes some complex administrative procedures that we're currently operating. Next slide, please. Okay, so sensitivity analysis, this is some of the numbers, and all these numbers are somewhat subject. Again, we can't nail down the exact numbers until we get to the actual pricing of the debt. But if you look at the top line here, our current debt, and I fast forward here to February 2021 because we have already collected the February 2021 payment, the debt payment, in this year's rates. So that's not really part of the refinancing math. So at that point, we're going to have $158 million in outstanding debt. Again, the annual payments are $13.5 million. And the total payments we'll make over those next 18 years will be $243 million. If we refinance now in a taxable advance refunding, we're looking at probably issuing about $175 million in debt. So it's more than what you see as the current debt because you have to fund the next 2 years of payments in an escrow ahead of the call date. But the annual payment will drop to about $12.2 million. That's about a $1.3 million savings. And total payments drop to $220 million, which, on a gross basis is around $23 million in savings over those 18 years. We show you the net present value of about $19 million in the board memo today. A significant savings at these levels. Just to show you a comparison, if we wait to the call date, which is again February 2023, at that point we would refinance $147 million in debt because we'd make 2 more principal payments over the next couple of years. If interest rates remained exactly the same as they are today, the annual payment would drop to about $11.2 million, so an additional $1 million savings from what we're seeing right now, and total payments down to about just under $206 million. That again assumes interest rates don't move. In red here, we kind of show the impact of a 1% increase in interest rates, or 100 basis points. So if we wait to the call date and rates rose 100 basis points, essentially it's the break-even point. You see the annual payment increases to 12.1, which is very close to what we're looking at right now. Total payments goes to $220.4 million, which is actually just a slight bit more than what we're looking at now if we do the refinancing. Plus, we wouldn't, by doing the refinancing now, we get the benefit of 2 years of savings earlier. So really, a 100 basis point move, as I showed on that graph, is not out of the question. I mean, you could, again, if any of these economic concerns that have been around the last 2 years are resolved, we could see a 100 basis point move very quickly. I mean, we're already starting to see a move in interest rates just with the announcement of the vaccine coming out. So a 100 basis point move is not a magnitude that, that's out of the question. Next slide, please. So the timeline. So again, back in early November, we had to start this process with the FERC filing. We have asked for a FERC decision by January 5th. We've been working on the bond structure and the documents. That will continue through January or into January. Today we're asking for your decision to continue this process. The tentative bond pricing we are looking for right now is the week of January 11th. That will be the week after the FERC decision. And that is probably we're still on track for that financing. We will reserve the right to not do the financing at that point if the market if market conditions are not favorable to us. We did this back in 2013. We got to the point of the pricing, but rates had moved away from us. We pulled the deal, put it on the shelf for about 4 months, and then as rates fell, we came back in. That's a possibility, but at this point, things still look very attractive. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Any questions from the board? Or comment on what a terrific job you're all doing?
One
Which
question.
we all agree you are doing a great job.
This is Ash. One question. Can we go back one slide? So where does the 175 FAR amount come from for current refinance?
So essentially, it's the $158 million that you see above that will be outstanding after we make that February 1st, 2021 payment. It's cost of issuance, associated with this new financing, which is probably typically you estimate about 1% is cost of issuance, so probably somewhere in the neighborhood of the $1.5 million.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 2 years of debt payments at that $13.5 million that we're paying now. Because essentially when you do advance refunding, the bondholders still hold these bonds until February 2023. They'll continue to get their interest payments and principal payments until the call date, and then they're called out. Now, for our purposes, they're off our balance sheet because you fund an escrow, and the bonds actually instantly become AAA rated because the escrow is funded with U.S. Treasury securities. But essentially, we have to take all the proceeds from this issuance, deposit in the escrow account, and then they buy 2-year treasuries essentially to secure the bonds until the call date. But that's why you see the higher par amount based on it's really the $13.5 million that's got to be paid over the next 2 years.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Any public comment on this item?
As a reminder, pressing pound 2 will indicate you wish to make a statement. We have none at this time.
If there aren't additional comments from the board, I believe we are ready for a motion.
We are ready for a motion. This one proves that lawyers do get paid by the word. So move that the ISO Board of Governors approves, authorizes, and directs management in the name and on the behalf of the ISO to perform the following actions. Issue a fixed-rate bond in the amount not to exceed $177 million to the California Statewide Communities Development Authority with a term not to exceed 18 years to refinance the acquisition of development of the Iron Point facility, other related building infrastructure costs, capitalized interest, debt service reserve funds, and bond issuance costs through the refunding of bonds issued in 2013 bonds in order to achieve debt service savings. Incur other obligations and guarantee the obligations of the ISO in connection with the bond offering and in furtherance thereof to execute and deliver from time to time any note or other instrument evidencing indebtedness or other obligations of the ISO, including related agreements and documents and guarantees of obligations and endorsements of notes when deemed to be in the best interest of the ISO. Transfer amounts collected for the February 1, 2021 debt payment relating to the 2013 bonds, the escrow fund related to the bond offering, distribute a preliminary official statement and an official statement relating to the marketing and sale with respect to the bond offering, and take any and all other actions necessary to effectuate the bond offering. So I have a motion.
Motion.
Second.
Second is Angelina. Governor Bargwart, your vote.
Aye.
Governor Borenstein.
Aye.
Governor Galizova.
Aye.
And Governor Leslie.
Aye.
Thank you, Governors. The motion passes.
Thank you, Roger. Moving on to item number 12, briefing on 2021 Policy Initiatives Roadmap and Annual Plan. Ms. Anna McKenna and Greg Cook.
Yes, thank you, Chair Galitova. I am happy today to, with Greg Cook, to be presenting to you a briefing on our 2021 three-year policy initiatives roadmap. Before Greg gets into further discussion of what the next year is going to look like, I wanted to just preface the presentation with a little bit of a description. As you know, we spend a lot of time prioritizing and going through our roadmap process with our stakeholders and to ensure that not only are we prepared to address the important issues we have to deal with in our policy initiatives efforts, but also our stakeholders are prepared to do so. And as we normally do, we come to you at the end of the year and provide you a briefing on what our roadmap looks like. But as we have come to you now this year, at this point, we have been receiving additional input, and we're going to be doing some adjustments to the roadmap, and that's to accommodate and integrate some important work we'll be doing next year for our readiness for next summer to deal with the heat-like events like we experienced this past year. These are important efforts and requires careful consideration. And after receiving input from our stakeholders and ourselves, looking at our what's ahead here, we felt it was necessary to do so. So this roadmap discussion will incorporate some of that feedback and incorporate the changes we're making. And as I said, this is important to ensure that we're ready for next summer's heat events. And with that, unless you have any questions of me, I will turn it over to Greg.
Thanks, Anna.
Greg? Thank you, Greg.
Okay, yeah, as Anna said, this is our annual presentation of the three-year policy initiative roadmap and annual plan. I'll apologize up front. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because I do want to get to have a little discussion on those changes that Anna mentioned that are near the end of the presentation here today. So if you can go to the next slide, please, Christina. Just a little background. I think as you're mostly aware that we do this annually, which describes the initiatives that the ISO is going to undertake over the next 3 years and their approximate time frames. We start this process with the policy initiatives catalog process. This is a way that we can identify all of the potential policy initiatives, both internally to the ISO as well as externally from stakeholders, and then we use those in setting up the 3-year and annual plan going forward. And we update that catalog twice a year to make sure that we're able to capture all of the identified policy initiatives that come up throughout the year. Okay, next slide, please. So we start with the primary drivers because these are how we do a lot of the prioritization of the policy development and implementation that we're going to do. So next slide, please. So we've really boiled it down to 3 primary drivers going forward. The first is resource sufficiency. So what we're looking at here is comprehensive reforms to the resource adequacy requirements. We believe those are needed because we need those to align with the changing nature of the loads and resources. And we're also seeing much tighter conditions throughout the West. We can't rely on economic imports as much as we have in the past. And we need to focus our resource efficiency not only on meeting that gross peak load, which has been the primary focus, but now we're finding it's also vitally important to meet net peak loads, ensuring we have sufficient reserve margins, but being able to address load and supply efficiency and accurate resource counting so that we know how much resources are actually providing towards meeting those reliability needs. The next driver is increased resource and load variability. This is making sure that we can manage that increased variability through our markets. So our primary focus there is on enhancing our day-ahead market as well as extending that day-ahead market to EIM entities to leverage some of that regional diversity across the West. And then the final one is new technologies. We're seeing new technologies coming into our market, primarily these, as we've had a lot of discussion on, new storage technologies coming in that are requiring us to enhance the market products we have, the way we do our modeling and deliverability so that we can efficiently integrate these new technologies into the market that are going to replace a lot of the attributes that were previously provided by the thermal fleet. Okay, next slide, please. We also given the events that happened last summer in August and September, we're focusing policy development on addressing issues that were identified in the root cause analysis. This comes in three primary areas. The first is resource adequacy reforms. Clearly we need to have sufficient resources. The second is scheduling priorities. We need to make sure that when we get into those very tight supply conditions that we have mechanisms and ensure that we're properly prioritizing load and exports during those market events. And then finally, we need to build that into the day-ahead markets as well. And then finally, we're looking at improved market incentives as well during these tight supply conditions, making sure we have the right price signals so that we can compete for imports. Also, make sure that we have the right price signals that are driving accurate load scheduling in the day-ahead market, as well as incentives for virtual resources to ensure they have the right incentives to align their actions with the operational needs of the system during those tight supply conditions. Okay, next slide, please. So first we'll start, I'll do a quick discussion on the resource adequacy reforms. Next slide, please. So we're really looking at reforming the resource adequacy program to ensure that the operational needs are met during all hours of the year by a reliable resource portfolio. Again, our current program is largely structured off of meeting peak load. So we're proposing a number of enhancements through our Resource Adequacy Enhancements Initiative. You can almost look at this as this is several initiatives wrapped in one. We have a portfolio assessment, which is making sure that that combined resource adequacy fleet can work together to meet our operational needs throughout all hours of the year. UCAP is an unforced capacity paradigm that we're looking at changing to provide incentives for resources to be available, as well as ensuring that we can do a better accounting of resource capacity contributions based on their historic availability. Look at enhancements to our planned outage process, ensuring that we have sufficient capacity procured in advance to cover those expected planned outages. We're finding that we have some issues now where there's last-minute capacity substitution that doesn't always occur. RA import reform, again, as the capacity situation is getting tighter throughout the West, it's very important that we have clear rules that identify physical resources behind those resource adequacy imports. We're not caught in a game of musical chairs. Looking at enhancing our must-offer obligations, we need to, again, ensure that our operational needs are met, all hours of the year, not just during peak hours. So we need to enhance our offer obligations to align with that as well. Flexible resource adequacy, this needs to be changed to look at what our real needs are for flexibility or to address some of that uncertainty, which means we need more resources with more speed. And we also need that to align with the changes we're making in the day-ahead market to meet those new imbalance reserve requirements that address that uncertainty between the day-ahead and real-time markets. And then finally, operationalizing storage. These are becoming a very significant part of our operation of our fleet that we need to ensure that we can ensure that those are being dispatched in a way to meet the operational needs, given their energy limitations as well as some of the market limitations that we currently have. Okay, next slide, please. So again, this is an extremely large initiative. We split this into two phases for implementation. The first tranche will be implemented next fall. That includes the RA import provisions, the planned outage process enhancements, increasing some of our backstop authority related to local availability, limited resources, as well as some of the provisions that we're putting in place for operationalizing storage, which includes a minimum charge requirement proposal. And then a year later, we would be putting in the remainder of the enhancements, including the unforced capacity counting, the portfolio analysis, and the new requirements for flexible resource adequacy and changes to our must-offer obligations to align with our day-ahead market enhancements. Okay, next slide, please. Moving on to the market side. Next slide, please. The first one, we've talked about this. This has been an ongoing initiative for over a year now, the day-ahead market enhancements, and we look to complete this next year. Again, this is a critical initiative to ensure that we're efficiently scheduling that supply in the day-ahead time frame to meet the net load and also address that uncertainty that may materialize between the day-ahead and real-time markets. And we're also looking at that this will provide significant benefits to the market in that it'll minimize the need for out-of-market actions, as well as some biasing we do to the residual unit commitment products, which are the current methods we're using to meet these ramping and uncertainty needs today. So those will be replaced by this imbalance reserve product. Next slide, please. Also, next, we're looking at extending the day-ahead market date. EIM entities. This is EDAM, which we believe will provide some significant regional benefits. So it'll help us in optimizing the day-ahead unit commitment across a larger footprint. It'll also produce hourly schedules for all of those EIM entities, and it should improve the transmission utilization across this larger footprint as well. Next slide, please. So the EDAM is another very large initiative that we've split up into 3 bundles of issues that we'll be addressing. The bundle 1, policy developments currently underway, which include the resource sufficiency evaluation, transmission provision, and transfer congestion cost revenue allocations. Again, once those are completed, then we will move on to bundles 2 and 3, and you can see that the issues there. So again, there's several issues that need to be worked out through this initiative. We believe bundle 1 are really the critical foundational issues that we're focusing on in the first instance. Okay, next slide, please. A new initiative that we're planning next year is we're calling dispatch enhancements, and this is really to provide greater incentives for variable energy resources as well as storage resources for following dispatch instruction. And we have a number of items on here. One is to manage the ramp rate so we can better control system balance. Again, we'd be looking at this for both solar as well as storage resources, which can ramp up and ramp down almost instantaneously. Enhancing market incentives for those resources to, again, accurately follow dispatch instructions. Look at potential solutions for decremental market power, and also changing some of the settlement rules for decremental exceptional dispatch. Okay, next slide, please. We're also planning a new comprehensive scarcity pricing initiative. This is in large part in response to some of the summer 2020 tight supply conditions. We believe this will help to improve our efficient market pricing during those tight supply conditions. And we're also looking at exploring different mechanisms to ensure that our real-time prices will incentivize that accurate day-ahead scheduling and bidding that aligns with operational needs during those tight supply conditions. And finally, look at ensuring that these new provisions, how they would work with what we've proposed under the FERC Order 831 designs, where we're going to the $2,000 bid cap, as well as potential interactions with system market power mitigation. Okay, next slide, please. We're also proposing a new frequency response initiative. This is an initiative we've committed to FERC that we would take on. We're finding that particularly when we have during conditions where we have high renewable output and low load conditions, we have reduced frequency response capabilities. And so today we actually transfer some of those frequency response obligations to other balancing authority areas through contractual agreements. But we're looking at replacing that going forward with potentially a new frequency response product so that we can dispatch our system in a way that provides that frequency response, or we can be procuring that from outside of our balancing authority area through the market as well. We'll also be looking at some enhancements to the regulation products we currently have in an effort to try and make sure that we're incenting the fast and accurate regulation resources. Okay, next slide. The final area is integrating distributed energy and storage resources. Next slide. So again, what we're really proposing, we had FERC Order 2222 came out just recently, so we have a new initiative making sure that we're in compliance with that. The good news there is that order was largely designed off of the ISO's current distributed energy resource provider provisions that we developed a couple of years ago. So we believe we not need to make significant changes to be in compliance with that new order. But again, we'll be working on that. The compliance filing will be due in July of next year. Okay, next slide, please. On the ESDR side of things, we've just completed our 4th phase of the ESDR initiative, which has new functionality going in place in 2021 and 2022. Right now, we're not planning an ESDR 5 next year. We think it's good to take a bit of a pause at this time to really focus on implementing some of those new provisions and also focusing on operationalizing some of those distributed energy resources. And by that, we mean enhancements to some of the distributed energy resource systems and tools, providing greater visibility into how those resources are operating, working on ways that we can do enhanced forecasting for those resources. And as I mentioned earlier, operationalizing storage is going to be a big piece of this as well. Okay, next slide, please. We're also looking at and working with the CPUC on developing alternative qualifying capacity methodologies for demand response. As part of the ESDR 4 initiative, we did hire E3 to do a study on how you could apply a methodology like ELCC to demand response resources to really account for the variable nature of those resources. So we're continuing work in that area, and we'll be updating some of those study results and providing those through the CPUC processes. Okay, next slide, please. We're also continuing to make sure we have the most effective use, value, and treatment of these distributed energy resources. Again, we think taking a bit of a pause on our policy development at this time will allow time for the local regulatory authorities to develop some of the policies that are needed on their side to better integrate these resources into the market. And we're also looking at refining some of our business practice manual and tariff provisions related to must-offer obligation, resource adequacy rules, and default energy bids. Okay, next slide, please. We've also talked about this recently. We're planning the Hybrid Resource Evolution Initiative. This is something we've committed to as part of the Hybrid Resource Initiatives that just wrapped up. We're looking at additional provisions to consider and other enhancements, including market power mitigation, resource adequacy, must-offer obligations, and again, once we have greater experience with operating these resources, we can consider additional functionality. Next slide, please. So now getting into the roadmap and annual plan. The first thing I want to point out, there's a lot of interdependencies between several of the initiatives that we currently have planned in the roadmap. For example, if you look at this diagram, it shows how the EDAM effort as well as the resource adequacy enhancements effort have to be tightly aligned with what we're doing with the day-ahead market enhancements. And all of this has to work together well in order for us to have a comprehensive market design solution at the end of all this, where, again, we're envisioning those day-ahead market enhancements where it can handle the increased uncertainty between day-ahead and real-time and expanding that on a more regional basis throughout the West. Okay, next slide, please. There are a number of initiatives that we've also taken out of the roadmap that were included last year. I'll go through each of these briefly. The first one is our System Market Power Phase 2. This was the part of System Market Power where we'll be looking at more comprehensive designs and expanding System Market Power to the day-ahead market as well. We had several stakeholder comments that thought this should really be done in conjunction with the EDAM design, so we have moved that from a separate initiative to be included in the scope of the EDAM initiative. Next, we've removed the Congestion Revenue Rights Track 2 initiative. This was put on our roadmap as a placeholder in the event that the modifications that we completed in 2018 did not sufficiently address some of the auction efficiency issues that we were seeing in the market. But the analysis that we've done is showing that those modifications are providing the enhancements that we expected them to, and that we've seen significant improvements in the auction efficiency. So given that, we don't think it's warranted we no longer need to reserve that space for having an additional congestion revenue rights initiative. Our commitment costs and default energy bid enhancements Phase 2. We've just recently, just about to implement Phase 1 of this initiative. We think it's prudent to hold off right now on Phase 2, which would be establishing market power mitigation measures for commitment costs and market bidding. But we really want to see how Phase 1 performs and also before we move forward to phase 2, make sure that we have consistency with the ultimate EDAM and day-ahead market enhancement designs. And then finally, the contingency modeling enhancements. This is something that was actually went through and approved by the board a couple of years ago. We've held off on it because it is a significant implementation effort, and we've seen some changing NERC standards that have really decreased the need for this. So given that, we think it's prudent right now to hold off on that to and allocate our resources to some of these other efforts that I've talked about. Okay, next slide, please. So here's a look at our 3-year roadmap. Again, this is kind of a high-level view of our policy and implementation efforts over the next 3 years. And I think the takeaway here is that, we're continuing to be in this period of rapid change, both from a policy development as well as an implementation standpoint. Again, the blue diamonds depict the initiatives that we'll be implementing in each fall release. That's why those kind of show up at the end of each calendar year there. We do have a few that will be implemented in the spring as well. But, again, this shows how we're trying to really balance our implementation workload with our policy development. But, it continues to be, quite significant over the next 3-year period. Okay, next slide, please. This is where I wanted to focus some of the changes that we've made relative to what we were calling the final roadmap that we have posted on our website. When we posted a revised draft of that based on this. But, in reviewing some of the stakeholder comments as well as internal processes on ensuring summer 2021 readiness, we found that it's really imperative for us to focus our efforts on policy development for summer 2021 at this time so that we can ensure that there's short-term measures that we can have developed and put in place by next summer can be focused on and completed over the first quarter of next year. So, there's a number of items that we're looking at there, such as enhancing our policies on export and load priorities, dealing with demand response, dispatch impacts on real-time prices, interim requirements for storage resources that are coming online next summer. Other items that have been suggested by stakeholders include things like providing bid cost recovery for hourly block imports during tight supply conditions to ensure we continue to get those bid into our market. Short-term scarcity pricing enhancements. This is, outside of the more comprehensive reforms that are being considered in that scarcity pricing initiative that we've scoped out. And then finally, we've also had a lot of requests to review the EIM resource sufficiency evaluation. So we think we'll include all those in this Omnibus Summer 2021 initiative, put a lot of policy and stakeholder focus on that over the next quarter. But in order to make room for that, then we would be pushing off for a quarter or more some of the other market design enhancement initiatives that we had planned, so that more comprehensive scarcity pricing initiative, we would not start that in January. We would put that off till the second quarter. Take a bit of a pause on our day-ahead market enhancements, as well as extending the day-ahead market DM entities, not start that dispatch enhancements initiative till the second quarter, and also push off the joint owned unit modeling initiative. So we think by doing this, this will really refocus not only our efforts, but also stakeholder efforts on ensuring that we have those policies developed in time for summer 2021. Our plan is to bring those policy developments to the board at the March board meeting so that we can file those in April and have them implemented then by June 1st of next year. Okay, next slide, please. So we did have several stakeholder comments on the final roadmap. In particular, LS Power, who has a large storage facility up and operational today, has advocated for additional storage policy development. So we're continuing to look at and learn from how that resource is operating. The minimum charge requirement for storage resources is something that's currently under consideration in our resource adequacy enhancements. Other enhancements they're looking for, I think these are types of things, once we learn from the operation of these resources, we can consider including in that dispatch enhancements initiative. As we talked about earlier in the board meeting today, PG&E's looking at revised RMR designation procedures to address cost and affordability issues. Again, I think this is something we're open to. We need to, learn more about that, get more information from that, and, ultimately down the road, if we find that that is something that needs to be prioritized, then we can reprioritize that along with the other initiatives in the annual plan. PG&E's also would really like to see us move forward with the system market power mitigation proposal for summer 2021. On the other hand, we also had several stakeholders urging us not to move forward on that. Again, we're taking more of a data-driven approach on that, and we're waiting to see some additional analysis over last summer as to what types of, if we saw any market power being exercised over the summer to help justify whether we need to move forward on that at this time or not. SDG&E wants us to include a stakeholder process to review convergence bidding uplift allocations. Again, this is something we've looked into somewhat, but we're still not yet convinced that there's issues there to be resolved. We continue to look at that, but we don't believe it should be prioritized over other initiatives at this time. SDG&E also recommended an outage substitution market to procure substitute capacity. This is something that we considered through the resource adequacy enhancements, but found it to be, very, have a high implementation cost for us to move forward with that. There's also a lot of policy issues related to that, so we have suggested a different approach, particularly for planned outage substitutions. And then PowerX requested prioritizing a short-term scarcity pricing mechanism and new bid cost recovery mechanism prior to next summer. And also some stakeholders recommended that we review the EIM resource efficiency evaluation. So those issues are all issues that we would be including in that new summer 2021 initiative that I just spoke about. So next slide. So in conclusion, we're planning, we will be reposting the roadmap with this updated plan, including that new summer 2021 initiative. And again, we're briefing you today. We'll be briefing the EIM governing body at their meeting in January. So I know I had to go through that really quickly, but that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to address any questions you might have.
Thank you, Greg. That's a very comprehensive presentation, and we have a lot of work in front of us, and I'm sure you'll keep us periodically updated on the major issues as well. At this time, Absolutely. Any questions from the board?
I have a couple of questions. On the proposed reforms will drive greater dependability and operability of the RA fleet. I don't see, but maybe, well, you can tell me if these are out of ISO scope or if they are in here somewhere, evaluating the role of DR in RA provision. There seems to be issues there. Changing evaluation of the need, of the hourly need for resource adequacy, the issue I raised earlier in the meeting. I see this reference to both capacity and energy, and I assume that includes revisiting the issue of a separate capacity versus energy requirements. That is, fulfillment of RA obligations with capacity alone with no energy contract. So how do each of those fit into your planning?
Yeah, so the role of, yeah, they do. And actually, the other clarification I probably should have made, these, when we look at the resource adequacy reforms that, were listed in the presentation here today, these are the reforms that we're looking at making that are under the ISO tariff purview. But there's also a number of things that we're working with the CPUC on as well to, advocate for changes in their requirements for resource adequacy. On the role of demanders.
I anticipate that response, and it leads me to another question of when you're doing your resource planning, that is deployment of staff time type resource planning, are you making space for participating in the CPUC processes that are of immense importance to the CAISO?
Yes, we do. I mean, our infrastructure policy staff spends a significant amount of time in those CPUC proceedings as well. But yeah, to get specifically answer your questions on the role of DR, we are looking at and advocating for new, counting methodologies for demand response, which again, we've been advocating for some time, which will better, more accurately align with their availability to the market. We're also looking at updating and putting in more stringent offer obligations for demand response to ensure that they are, have similar obligations for offering into the market as other resource adequacy resources. Those types of things we think are critical so that we can, effectively have good visibility into what DR is out there and be able to effectively dispatch it through our markets and ensure that it's contributing the amount that it's being credited for through the RA program. Your second question on the hourly need of resource adequacy, that's another thing that, we're very focused on. The portfolio assessment, for example, that we're looking at that's where we're going to essentially look at the entire resource adequacy fleet that's been shown to us through load serving entity showings, put that together, run it through a, production analysis to ensure that our operational needs can be met, all hours of the day. And that kind of gets to, not only meeting the capacity needs of the system, but the energy needs as well. So, that's, a critical piece that will be that final check on that. But, from that standpoint, we're also looking at advocating different RA requirements at the PUC as well that'll help us get closer to that to ensure that when we do run that assessment that it's largely successful. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Ash.
Can I jump in for a second? This is Ash. So sure. You run your portfolio assessment, and if you discover that you don't have sufficient energy, say at the next peak, what happens next?
Well, our current thought, again, we're still in the policy development as to, what type of actual backstop authority we would have relative to that. But, essentially the way that would work is if we run that analysis and shows that we're short, then we would essentially notify the LSEs that we're short, give them a chance to cure that by securing additional resources to meet that need. And then in the event they do, then we're fine. In the event they don't, then we'd be looking to have new backstop procurement authority to go and procure those resources under our CPM authority to ensure that those
needs are met. How far at the time are you running this? Before the sort of moment?
No, so this would be done, currently the resource adequacy program is we have an annual process as well as a monthly process. So we would be running it before those processes to ensure that the resources shown are able to meet the expected needs.
Greg, I'm sorry.
Just clarifying, you do the assessment annually and monthly?
Right. So this is done, far in advance of the actual operating hours. So this isn't something that's done, hourly or anything like that. It's done, prior to the operating month to ensure that we have those resources secured from a resource adequacy standpoint, sufficient resources that are offering into our markets so that we know when we get into those operational needs situations during the month that the market's going to be able to have sufficient resources to align with those needs.
And Greg,
thank you. Just quickly, I believe Elliot also has a comment that he wants to make right here. Can we make sure that Elliot Mainzer line is unmuted, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair.
I have a question.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Are you guys able to hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, thank you. Just a couple of points, and I appreciated earlier, first of all, just the acknowledgement of just this tremendous amount of work and vision that goes into this plan. And also, I wanted to thank Governor Bornstein for comments earlier about just making sure that we really appreciate the nuances of the necessary reforms of resource adequacy paradigm. I think even as we're exploring increases to the planning reserve margin with the PUC, that there's a lot to talk about. It's a multidimensional issue, and I think the feedback that we're getting, the discussions to really look at both capacity and energy and the different time steps, very, very important. So I appreciate the support there as we look at that. I also want to point out that this set of reforms is something that we have to be able to coordinate very closely with the other regulatory authorities. We have to have an integrated resource adequacy drivetrain in California. The ISO has important authorities under its tariff. We're certainly not, afraid of using them. But as we discussed with the RMR conversation earlier, backstop authority for the ISO is really kind of an action of last resort. We would much rather prefer that the front end of this process ensures sufficiency and good capacity contracting and a healthy reserve margin for the state, so that we're not put in the position of having to go and do RMR contracts or backstop capacity procurement. So again, we're prepared to do it, but it is an action of last resort. And then finally, just one more. Greg talked about the importance, because summer 2021 readiness is so foundational for all of us here in California, getting ready for next summer, coming out of the root cause analysis, that, as Greg said, we have reprioritized some of the very foundational elements, resource adequacy enhancements for our markets, to make sure that everything that we're building is built on a platform of sufficiency. And we noticed that we are going to be making some changes to the sequencing of the discussion around EIM and EDAM. But I wanted just for folks that are participating in those conversations to know that we are just absolutely committed to maintaining our momentum on those discussions, that we will continue to outreach to stakeholders. There'll be obviously an important governance conversation, hopefully decision, as Therese mentioned earlier, in the end of Q1, and we will stay very connected to try to maintain what we consider to be very constructive momentum within the West on these discussions. So just wanted to reflect on a few of those points, and thank you all for the very excellent comments and feedback for this work plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary, you had a question?
Yes, I had a question for Greg just regarding the timing of the CPUC response to our recommendations about increasing the RA reserve.
That's a good question, Mary. I'm not. I don't have the exact response to that. This was part of an emergency OIR that they're currently under. So, I think it is something. It's under consideration now, and we're expecting to have a decision, obviously, that could be in effect by next summer. But I don't have in front of me that. I'm not sure exactly what their schedule is for that.
This is Mark Roth. They're in the process of setting the schedule and the scoping. So that is in process right now. As we've advocated and Greg has indicated, we're striving for a decision in time in the April time frame so that we can be ready for the summer. So they're considering that.
Yeah, and I think, Mark, anything that we can do to help support that, it seems critical, given what Elliot just said and what we know, that what that decision ends up being as it affects us. The other question I have is regarding the stakeholder comments and how you're going to make decisions on some of these key recommendations and integrate it into the planning.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we did see a lot of stakeholder comment. We get the comments throughout the roadmap process as well that helps us to formulate this plan. I think that in large part, a lot of the stakeholder comments we received was helpful in being instructive as to how we made those reprioritization efforts for the summer 2021 initiative, so that we did have a stakeholder process to address a lot of the items that stakeholders would like to see us try and achieve prior to next summer. As well as a lot of times we're able to address some of their comments, not necessarily with a new initiative, but we can look at including those into the scope of some of the currently planned initiatives. So, a good example of that, again, is some of the LS Power concerns. We can look at those when we're starting and scoping out that dispatch enhancements initiative that we're will be running through next year.
And so, Mark, are you basically saying that you're going to deal with those as they come up with the planning already envisioned?
Yeah, I mean, it's, oh, sorry, go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead, Greg, I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, the other point I wanted to make on the roadmap is, this is a live document that we manage throughout the year. The roadmap really depicts, our best thinking and planning at this time. Clearly unexpected things come up throughout the year, but it's what we're really trying to focus on here is this is a prioritization and planning function that we have here. So, for example, when you look at that annual plan, that's what we're planning from a resource allocation standpoint, fully allocating out our resources. If, we had arguments to add another initiative or a new initiative, and we would have to then consider, what are the merits of that initiative? Why is it being proposed? And once we fully understand that, then it's really comparing that to the plan that we have, and should we then, again, reprioritize that over other initiatives that are included in the plan. And that's the type of thing that, we actively manage through the year, and again, try and keep you as well as the stakeholders updated on that planning as we go through. But, again, it's somewhat of a, forced prioritization that, we can't just continue to just add initiatives onto this plan. You really have to have a thoughtful way of, okay, if we're going to add one and we think that it's a high enough priority, which of these do we think it's a higher priority than, and adjust the plan relative to that.
Well, understood, and we appreciate the focus on preparing for the summer of 2021 as one of your main priorities. Absolutely, and just echo what Elliot just said about our commitment to the EIM and the EDAM process as well. That we're still 100%. Yeah.
Great. Any additional comments, questions? Okay. Item number 13, Lucky 13, informational reports. Those are informational only. Anybody have questions or comments on any of the reports? Seeing none, this concludes our last meeting for a very interesting, exciting, at times nerve-wracking 2020. I want to wish each and every one of you happy holidays and a peaceful 2021. See you all next year. Thank you.
Thank you.
And on the board, we have a meeting at 12:30. Our day continues.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah, happy holidays.
See you, everyone.
Okay.
That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conference Enhanced. You may now disconnect.